Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Michael became excited. Part of the reason why he wanted to relocate to the parched lands was because of the potentially talented monsters that he could come across. Ever since he discovered he could awaken their talent, a whole new realm of possibilities entered his mind. People overlooked monsters and beasts as nothing more than instinctual creatures with no potential. But ever since he met Fudge, he realized that monsters were as talented as humans. So, he welcomed this sudden encounter. He stopped his automobile and immediately got out to observe his surroundings. From his perspective, there was not a single piece of living being anywhere he looked. There was just an endless wasteland of cracked soil and the occasional tumbleweed that rolled in the distance. Skills didn't lie, so Michael knew that there was a living being somewhere here, but he just couldn't see them through normal means. He used his supreme skill, mana gathering, to maximize his sensitivity in mana, allowing him to see and feel everything that his eyes could not see. Earth mana was the most abundant, followed by air and fire. As expected, he didn't find much water mana in the ground except for thin clouds in the sky. But as he narrowed his eyes upon the small mounds of sand and soil, he saw a collection of light mana, something that only living beings emitted. Strangely enough, the light mana in those figures were starting to fade, blinking in and out of existence as if they were about to expire and turn into dark mana, which only the dead emitted. They were running out of time. He had to act now. Michael's body immediately started to glow a silver light, with air mana gathering at his feet and propelling him into the sky, reaching speeds faster than his automobile. With his 3-star spell, Burst Fly, he was able to reach the dying figures just in time. Upon landing, Michael set his eyes on a small group of animals that resembled primates back in his previous life. They lay on the ground huddled together, with their chests heaving for air. Their breaths became shallower and shallower each time. Michael raised his hand and looked up at the skies. Right now, the only thing that was going to save them was an injection of light mana into their bodies. Usually, he would see an abundance of light mana everywhere through the trees, grass, and nature in the surroundings. But this place had none of that. So, his only source of light mana was the sun. He stared at the great big ball of fire and grabbed it in his hands. Suddenly, visible light blobs floated down from the skies and gathered at his palms. Then, he shoved the light mana into the dying animals, infusing them with life. Slowly, the primates' breathing got better and better, with the pained expressions on their faces disappearing into relief. They were fine for now, but this was only a temporary solution. With the 3-star spell, Medical Inspect, he found out that these animals needed water and food. So, he brought them back to his automobile and drove them back to his house. Michael observed the primates who were slowly awakening from unconsciousness. Chat JK2, what kind of creatures are they? Before Michael left, his father gave him a complete bestiary of all the known beasts, monsters, and demi-humans populating the parched lands. So, ChatJK2 had no trouble identifying the creatures. According to the bestiary, they are a species called mankeys. They are the weakest species in the entire territory of the parched lands, and possibly the entire world. They do not have any special characteristics or traits that help them survive the harsh environment of the parched lands. The only reason why their species has survived to this day is because of the unity within their kind. Mankeys. Species, yellow mankeys. Type, demi-human. Difficulty, element, none. Michael observed the mankeys and found that they had vaguely human-like faces, similar to Neanderthals back in his previous world. Their entire body was covered in stained, yellow fur, including parts of their faces. They also had a tail on their backs, which was why Michael thought they were primates when he first saw them. Michael waited for the yellow mankeys to regain consciousness. He already fed them food and water a while ago, so they were close to waking up. After a few minutes, the 5 mankeys slowly opened their eyes one by one. Their eyes showed confusion as they came to grips with their current situation. They patted their bodies, surprised as to how they survived the intense heat of the sun. Then, they looked around at their new and strange environment until they saw Michael looking over at them. These creatures weren't stupid. They knew that they should have died in the heat of the desert, but were somehow saved by this benevolent being. The 5 yellow mankeys immediately bowed to him, showing their deference to the one that saved them. "Thank you. We beg for mercy. Indebted we are of you." They were demi-humans, which meant that they were capable of speaking the human language, albeit a little slower and simpler than 5-year-old humans. Still, this made communicating much easier. "It's fine. I couldn't let you guys die in the heat of the sun, could I? By the way, what were you doing in the middle of the desert?" he asked them. The 5 mankeys all kneeled in front of Michael and explained, with a limited vocabulary, about the circumstances that led them to a near-death experience. From what Michael understood, it seemed that they journeyed out of their village and into the desert in search of food and water. But unfortunately, the heat of the sun, coupled with the lack of water in their bodies, became far too much to bear. They lost their strength and ended up disoriented in the desert. They wandered around until finally they succumbed to the conditions. "We thank, benevolent being, but we must go. Yes, we must find water for village." Michael walked over to his kitchen island and turned the lever on his sink, allowing the water to flow freely into a wooden cup in his hands. "If it's water you want, then you can take it with you," he said with the most casual voice. The 5 mankeys all had wide eyes as they looked at the precious, life-saving water flowing like rain from that strange metal thing. "Wow, water! Oh, water!" Tears flowed from the mankeys' eyes. They had searched far and wide through the desert to find water. They would have never thought they would see so much water flowing from a strange metal thing. "Please, benevolent being, we offer our lives for water. We will sacrifice our lives in exchange for water." Michael waved off their seriousness. "Please, there's no need for that. You can take all the water you want for free. Oh, and I have some fruit and dried meat here with me. Would you like some of that too?" The mankeys all looked at Michael with confusion painted on their faces. For them, water was even more precious than gold. People died in the desert just to get a few drops of water for their family. But now, Michael wanted to give them all the water they needed, for free. Any person would be confused when someone wanted to give them a bar of pure gold without asking for anything in return. "We will pay for the water with our lives." They thought that Michael was someone who simply had a large stock of water in reserve. They thought he was just one of those extremely fortunate beings who was able to witness rain and store it for themselves. "Don't worry, I can have all the water I need," Michael said as he raised his hand and manifested a ball of water in his hand. Upon seeing this, the yellow mankeys prostrated themselves even deeper. "Wizard, sorcery, water bearer, we become slaves for sorcerer in exchange for water." Michael felt sorry for these mankeys. As a species, they lived at the very bottom of the food chain. They felt as if they couldn't offer anything to Michael aside from giving him their lives. Unlike most monsters and demi-humans, they didn't have talent in any magic, which meant that their species had absolutely no chance of harnessing the power of the mana elements. But Michael didn't think they were completely useless. After all, he had heard of a species who didn't have any magic and was able to become the top species of the world with nothing but their intelligence and innovation. It was the humans from his previous life. Michael knew that mankeys had the same potential as them. He just had to give them the opportunity. "Benevolent being, we are at your service. Yes, we will do anything, even if it meant slaving away in the heat of the sun." They were willing to do anything as long as they could pay for water. And in their desperation, one of the mankeys walked up to Michael and bowed at his feet. In that moment of contact, Michael heard ChatJK2's voice ring out inside his head. "Supreme skill, gift bestowal activated. Yellow mankey, potential talent, S-class engineer extraordinary. Potential skill, blueprint manifestation. The user will gain the ability to show a 3-dimensional projection of a blueprint in his mind onto the real world, allowing workers to accurately build the project without any errors or imperfections." Michael's face lit up as he realized that this specific Mankey was the one he sensed to have incredible talent. And luckily enough, this Mankey's talent was perfect for his plans in the future. If you really want to pay for the water, then there is something that I need help with. The Mankeys looked up at Michael with anticipation. Finally, they could be of use. Finally, they could offer their lives to save the families back in their village. I want you to awaken, he said with a smile. The Mankeys all looked at each other, confused as to what Michael was talking about. After all, they were Mankeys. They weren't humans who could awaken a talent and transcend into a powerful being. Apologies, we are useless. We cannot awaken. We have no purpose. Michael shook his head. Just trust me. I can awaken your talents and show you that you have potential. I can show you that you can do much greater things. His words made the Mankeys look up at Michael with wonder in their eyes. He looked at them with a different gaze, as if he truly believed that as Mankeys, they could achieve more than begging and scavenging for sustenance to survive. First, what are your names? Michael asked. The Mankey in the middle looked up at Michael. Apologies, we have no name. Demi-humans like the Mankeys lived simple lives, needing no names to refer to each other. Well, let me give you one then, Michael said as he raised his hand. Chat JK2, awaken its talent, please. Understood. Awakening its talents. A golden light shone from his hand, emitting a kind of power that felt cool and refreshing for the Mankey. The creature felt as if it was bathing in the rain, with water nourishing it from the inside and out. Suddenly, its body started to glow with a white light, enveloping its entire body until it was obscured into a blinding shroud of light. After a few seconds, the light died down. The Mankey in the middle used to have a hunched back, with its hands almost touching the ground like an ape. But now, it was standing upright, even taller than Michael. Fur was still covering its body, but now there were patterns all over its body that resembled geometric shapes. The previously stained and dirted color of the fur on its body was now yellow like the sun, with the pattern having a golden streak that seemed to glow under the sun. Its face looked much more human, with refined facial features that would have made him indistinguishable from other people. However, the fur on the sides of its face made it sure that they were a completely different species from humans. What would you like to name this Mankey? Asked ChatJK2. Michael reminded the Mankeys of a very iconic character in his previous life called Yukon. Kong, that's his name. Downloading the entire syllabus course on mechanical engineering to Kong. Complete. Kong looked at his body, surprised at his new stature. His mind felt much more open than before, as if an entire new perspective on the world was opening up in its brain. He felt more conscious, more aware of his surroundings. It felt as if he ascended into a new realm of reality. Kong. Magic a class. Element mastery. Unity element. Magic purity, 90%. Mana quantity, not applicable. Species, sapient yellow Mankey. Type, machinist Mankey. Talent, S-class engineer extraordinaire. Realm, 1-star engineer. Skills, blueprint manifestation. Lesser unity gathering. Lesser unity defense. Kong looked at his hands, fully aware that he could do so much more than before. He felt like he could do anything. He immediately looked at Michael and bowed at his feet. Thank you, benevolent being. You have saved me and given me a new life. I accept my name as Kong and vow to serve as your loyal servant. The rest of the Mankeys looked at Kong with eyes of wonder and astonishment. They could barely believe that he was the same Mankey that they had known all their lives. Are you really a Mankey? You change a lot. Hair change, body change, but Mankey same? Kong chuckled. Yes, I'm still the same Mankey as before, he said to them. But I have changed. I have evolved to something better. The rest of the Mankeys ogled at Kong's new appearance. They surrounded him and playfully picked at his fur. Not only did Kong's appearance change, his whole aura became completely different to that of a normal Mankey. Kong passively absorbed the elemental mana in his body due to the lesser mana gathering skill he obtained from Michael. Water, air, fire, and most importantly water, was gathering at his skin and nourishing his body with power. He was no longer the same skinny and emaciated Mankey that was on the brink of death. The rest of the Mankeys felt this kind of presence only in higher beings and more complex demi-humans like the dwarves and the elves. Those beings were at the top, comparable only to humans. And now, the Mankey that was standing right in front of them was emitting the same kind of strength as those powerful species. They couldn't believe it. This led them to revere and worship Michael even more. They thought that the only being that could change a species being was a god. Now, they treated Michael as one too. Benevolent, holy being. We worship. Michael stopped them before things got too out of hand. Guys, please stop it. I'm not some kind of god, he said, waving his hands. But how could they stop worshiping him when he single-handedly saved their species from extinction? Now that Kong had evolved into the next line of his species, he now held the power to change the course of life in the village. They bowed to him even deeper. Michael felt burdened with all this worship. He had to clap his hands and get their attention. Now, who wants to evolve next? He asked them. The rest of the Mankeys looked at Michael with confused faces. They thought that he was done with Kong. After all, a power that could change Kong into a superior species must take some kind of toll on Michael, right? Kong had to convince his fellow Mankeys that Michael had enough power to awaken the talents of thousands upon thousands of Mankeys and never even break a sweat. When he awakened, Kong was able to briefly observe just a smidgen of Michael's true power. And with what he could see, Kong felt as if he was looking at an endless horizon of an ocean. Michael's power was endless. Finally, after a few minutes, Michael awakened the talents of the other 4 Mankeys. The 3 Mankeys only had a talent in the C-class and below. One of them had the D-class metallurgy mender, with a corresponding skill that allowed him to handle metal with ease. The other had a talent called C-class wooden whisperer, which was very useful in growing and making trees prosper even in the harshest of environments. The other had a D-class Taurus keeper, which meant that he was talented in breeding and taking care of cows. The last Mankey was the most surprising. First of all, unlike the rest of the Mankeys, this one evolved with barely no fur on their skin. And if anyone were to look at this Mankey with no context, they would mistake it for a human woman. Her face was defined with feminine features that could be considered quite beautiful in most cultures. And instead of having yellow fur with patterned golden streaks, she had long, flowing yellow hair and eyebrows with similar patterned golden streaks. The only thing that distinguished her from a human was the tail on her back, which was still colored yellow and gold. Michael named her Anne, which she quickly accepted. "Greetings, Boss Michael." And, "At your service," she said, with her tail wagging back and forth rapidly. But that wasn't the only thing that was special with her. Michael was surprised to find that she had an even better talent than Kong. And Magic S-Class, Element Mastery, Unity Element, Magic Purity, 95%, Mana Quantity, Not Applicable, Species, Sapient Yellow Mankey, Type, Agricultural Mankey, Talent, SS-Class Cultivation Idol, Realm, 1-star Farmer, Skills, Greenhouse, any crop that the user plants will grow regardless of the season or weather, Multiplicative Harvest, the user will be able to harvest multiple times from a single crop. Lesser Unity Gathering, Lesser Unity Defense. Michael was mistaken. It seemed that she was the one that his superior golden nose was talking about. He searched through the entirety of Kingsbridge using Fudge's clones to see if anyone else had a good talent, but the best ones he saw were only A-class. Now, he met 2 beings at the S-class or higher in the Parched Lands, of all places. "Boss, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for this gift. You will not be disappointed in taking a chance on us. We make your words come true. We will achieve greater things than even we can imagine," and said, tapping her heart. The rest of the evolved Mankeys thanked Michael, showing their sincerity to the man that changed their lives for the better. Kong approached Michael and kneeled. "Boss, we are ready to fulfill any of your orders." Michael shook his head. Although there were a lot of things he wanted to do, he didn't want to forget the most important thing in the world. "I want you to lead me to your village," he said with a serious tone. "They need water, right? We should go now. We can't waste any time." Kong, and the rest of the Mankeys felt emotions welling up in their eyes. Michael had no reason to save their village, yet it was his first priority. "Yes, boss. Thank you," they all shouted. Using the automobile, Michael and the newly evolved yellow Mankeys traveled through the desert to find their village. The wheels jumped through the cracks in the ground and maneuvered through cactuses as Kong did his best to recall their village's location. Finally, Michael's eyes caught sight of a large collection of life mana in the distance. Using a simple one-star spell called Telescopic Sight, he was able to confirm the location of the village. Strangely enough, the village was located on a large crater, which made it almost undetectable in the vast valley of the desert. As soon as he parked the automobile, the Mankeys all rushed out and looked down to their village. The once vibrant and lively collection of homes made out of mud and clay was now completely covered in a strange black liquid. This was the reason why the village was in dire need of assistance. This strange black liquid had invaded their homes and destroyed their safe haven. This meant that they would have to relocate to a safer place. However, such a large migration of Mankeys would need a lot of resources, especially water. That was the reason why Kong and the other Mankeys journeyed out of their village. They needed resources to resettle. Kong and the rest of the Mankeys jumped down, surprising the rest of the villagers that were hiding within the homes embedded on the sides of the large crater. Children screamed, while their parents tried to shush them from creating any noise. They thought they were getting invaded. The power and magic emanating from these 5 strange figures were unlike any species they had ever encountered before. Even though they had the same yellow fur and monkey-like features, they were completely different from normal Mankeys. They stood tall with pride, with strength, completely foreign for yellow Mankeys. "We surrender. We beg for mercy." One elderly Mankey, with his yellow hair almost turning white and a spine even more curved than a circle, walked out of the homes and confronted the 5 strangers. But upon gazing at these 5 figures, the elderly Mankey felt as if he was looking at something ancient, something transcendent. And somehow, they looked familiar. But that wasn't possible. "It's us," said Anne. But her words did nothing to convince the old man. After all, she looked even more beautiful than most humans. Kong knew that words wouldn't convince the old man. So, he approached him and took the elderly man's hands and respectfully put them over his forehead. This was a cultural act that only Mankeys knew. It was then that the old man's eyes shone in recognition. "You? But how?" The old man's excitement made the other Mankeys hiding in the houses finally come out of their houses. As more and more Mankeys came out, more of them recognized the 5 strangers. A celebration occurred within them, with hugging and jumping spreading through the Mankeys. When they didn't return after a few days, they thought they had all died. But somehow, they didn't just survive, they turned into this completely new Mankey with strength and power that was completely uncharacteristic of the weakest race in the entire world. "How did this happen?" they all asked. Kong and then smiled as they pointed upwards. Just then, the village of Mankeys looked up at the skies and saw the figure of the 10-year-old human boy floating in the air. He had his hands in his pocket and a casual smile. Michael slowly floated to the crater, introducing himself to the Mankeys with a simple, "Hello." "He saved us," Kong said, showing his admiration and respect for Michael with just his tone. "He gave us water, he gave us food. He gave us everything we needed to survive without even asking for anything in return," and said, her eyes shining once she started to talk about Michael. They told the whole village that his powers allowed them to transcend from a normal Mankey into this new and better form, filled with talent and magic. The elderly Mankey looked at Michael, disbelief written all over his face. As the oldest one in this village, he had met a lot of humans before, even the most powerful of wizards, yet he hadn't heard of anyone capable of doing this. "Sir," the old man uttered, "why have you come to our village? As you can see, we are close to extinction. The curse of the lands has taken over our home. More than half of the homes were flooded with this strange sludge of black liquid. Some of the houses were completely submerged, making it impossible to live in. These Mankeys considered this to be a curse. But when Michael set his eyes upon this black liquid, he didn't see a curse. He saw liquid gold. It was petroleum oil. This village was smack dab in the middle of an oil well, which had so much oil that they were overflowing to the surface. If America existed in this world, they would have already invaded this land. Michael, of course, wasn't going to let this chance go to waste. "I have come to this village for only one reason," Michael said, addressing everyone in the village. "I came here to give you a chance to live without worrying about food, water, or a place to live." The elderly Mankey shook his head. "We cannot offer anything." Michael pointed at the black liquid behind them. "If you're willing to give me ownership of that black liquid, I can give you everything you need to survive and more." They wanted nothing more than to survive, than to drink water and eat food every day. And Michael was the person that could give them that. They were ready to do anything for Michael. They were ready to become his slaves. But he wanted nothing more than the black liquid, something they considered a curse. It was too good to be true. To fully convince them that he had nothing but good intentions, Michael snapped his hands, and 5 big barrels of water floated from above and landed down to the village. The elderly Mankey slowly approached the barrel. Upon seeing it filled with cool, refreshing water, the old Mankey's body began to shake. He trembled, until finally, he couldn't take it and plunged his whole head into the barrel, drinking all the water he wanted to drink. The rest of the Mankeys soon followed, celebrating as they filled their bellies with life-saving water. One by one, Michael awakened the talents of every single Mankey in the village. The once weakest race now had more magical power than even most superior races. The once weakest race who struggled to survive now had knowledge and masteries in jobs that were miles and miles above the current base of knowledge in the world. Most of them had C to a class talents, but that wasn't even the most surprising part. The yellow Mankeys seemed to have talent in some type of production job. Everything from agriculture, carpentry, forestry, and even to cuisine. Usually, Michael would see different types of talents in a given group. When he inspected the talents in Kingsbridge, he saw talents in swordplay, production, singing, and other such jobs with very different varieties. But this village of Mankeys all seemed to have talent in creating some kind of product. Can you tell me why? ChatJK too? Upon inspecting their DNA, there is reason to believe that yellow Mankeys, in particular, have a natural tendency to become talented producers. Michael would have never expected that a single species could produce one single type of talent through all their descendants. Michael didn't dislike this. In fact, it was quite a fortunate stroke of luck that he met these yellow Mankeys. Each of them had a specific talent that could greatly contribute to making his and everyone's life in the parched lands so much more comfortable. After their awakening, they moved into Michael's territory. And on the first day, the newly evolved Mankeys started to reconstruct the homes they had back in their old village. Just as they were gathering mud and sand to create the walls of their houses, Michael immediately stopped them in their tracks. Their homes were completely not up to his standards and were susceptible to a lot of weather conditions. Even though they gained skills and base knowledge about production, they knew nothing about the best way to use them. For example, one of them had the seemingly useless skill called Limestone Finder, which allowed him to search for limestone in his vicinity. Michael immediately got a great idea upon seeing it. He ordered the Mankey to find as much limestone as possible, which he was able to do quite easily. Once given the limestone, Michael went to work. Using a variety of one-star spells, he started to pound the limestone into powder and mixed it with a lot of clay, sand, and other types of aggregates. Once finished, he had a very thick and viscous type of gray material. Any person in his previous world would immediately recognize this material. It was concrete. Michael arranged the concrete into a block and used a heating spell to quickly dry out the water contents in the concrete. And within a few seconds, the concrete started to harden, surprising all Mankeys. They surrounded the solid block, touching it with their hands and knocking on it to try and test its resilience. One of them tried to punch through the concrete block and found himself with nothing but injured knuckles. They couldn't believe it. This strange concrete was even stronger than mud and stone walls. Once Michael taught them how to create their own concrete, all the talented engineers and construction mankeys like Kong started to implement them into their homes. At the end of the day, the mankeys spent the rest of their time watching in wonder as the faucets and showers splashed them with water. Whoa, water! I can bathe and drink at the same time. I can't believe it. Do I really have an endless source of water in my own home? This is a miracle. Hooray for our boss Michael. Hooray, they all cheered. Michael, of course, taught Kong the basics of the plumbing system, which he quickly picked up and learned within an hour of lecturing. Then, Kong began to teach the other mankeys as well, allowing them all to work at the same time and finish building the houses as fast as possible. Since Kong was the most talented engineer in the group, he became the de facto leader of all production in the village. And whenever Michael wanted something done, he would always entrust it to Kong. Meanwhile, and was the leader of her own group as well. As an SS-class talented individual, she became extremely adept in everything agriculture-related. On the forest side of the territory, she and a couple of other mankeys with agriculture talents began to start a farm system. She incorporated everything she learned about farming into this project, including all the necessary conditions that different crops needed to grow. Right now, she planted any crop that she could find in the forest. This included potatoes, some leafy greens, carrots, and other crops that everyone could eat for nourishment. With the help of Kong and his group of engineers, they were able to incorporate an irrigation system that made watering plants so much easier. Michael was so surprised as he watched the evolved mankeys do their work. After all, only a day had passed, and yet the whole place had completely changed. His house used to be the only thing in the territory, but now there were a lot of concrete houses under construction near him, with a farm and a quarry surrounding them. This was the true power of the yellow mankeys. They were extremely talented in production. He didn't have to worry about managing them at all. So he set his sights on the concrete block near his feet. It was only now that he realized the full potential of concrete in this magical world. In his previous life, concrete became the standard material for construction because of its durability and its availability around the world. But perhaps, if concrete had one weakness, it would be the time required for the cement to harden. That was the case for his previous life, but not in this world. With the help of magic, cement could harden within a few seconds. This could revolutionize how construction was made in this world. Michael immediately wanted to contact Castell so that they could sell concrete to the world. Even before he started to sell concrete, Michael wanted to stock up on a lot of it first. After all, this village would also end up using a lot of concrete to finish all the houses and buildings under construction. So, he instructed some of the mankeys to journey out into the desert to try and find a good lime quarry they could tap into. Fortunately, once they returned from their scouting, they found a big one very near to their current location. He instructed them to start mining all of the lime they could get. And to make their jobs easier, he lent them the automobile to haul all the limestone they mined for the day. Of course, he had to teach them how to ride it first. Thankfully, one of them had a talent that allowed him to learn driving quite easily. For now, the amount of limestone they could gather in a day was just enough to supply the whole construction project for the village. However, if Michael wanted to export concrete to the world, then he would need a lot more workers. Lolo, do you know some other mankeys that can help us? Michael asked the middle-aged-looking hob mankey in front of him. He named the elderly mankey in front of him as Lolo, and after his evolution, he seemed to have de-aged by a couple of years and became a man in the prime of his life. However, the fur covering his entire body remained white, making him look like an albino mankey. Also, Michael decided to address the evolved mankeys as hob mankeys because he reminded them of fantasy goblins back in his previous life. After all, both were considered the lowest and weakest species in the world. So, he decided to name their evolution like how goblins evolved to become hobgoblins. Yes, Boss Michael, replied Lolo with the gravitas of a cool uncle. There are other yellow mankey tribes scattered around the parched lands. However, we do not know about each other's exact locations, Lolo replied. Michael thought it would be nice if he could evolve more mankeys and have them live in his estate. He needed a lot more talented hobmankeys that could help with the jobs in this village. The mining group needed more workers. Kong had also been asking him for more talented engineers, and even needed help in expanding the farm. It was extremely fortunate that yellow mankeys had the natural talent to become producers, so he could be sure that at least most of them would have something to do in the village. So, Michael decided to dedicate some hobmankeys to try and find some of those tribes hidden in the desert. His intention was not to just get more workers, but to also help their current situation. He was worried that there were a lot of mankeys experiencing the same hardships that Lolo and the others had to endure. There was plenty of space, food, and water here in his home. They didn't need to be suffering out there. He liked the village to be a lot more crowded. As the famous saying said, the more the merrier. Lolo, please find some able-bodied hobmankeys who can make the trip through the parched lands to contact those remaining tribes, Michael said. He entrusted this job to Lolo because the old man had an A-class talent called Community Leader, which gave him the appropriate skills and knowledge to manage the current village. Lolo accurately tracked all the jobs and talents of all the hobmankeys in the village, allowing him to easily assess which ones would be the best at which jobs. I have a couple of individuals who are perfectly capable of this job, Boss Michael. I will task them to find the other Mankey tribes. Trust that it will be done, Lolo said, bowing towards Michael. Michael then addressed his shadow on the ground. Fudge, you'll have your clones accompany them, right? The cute rogue slime with a Chinibu mentality popped out of his shadow and landed on the ground like a ninja. Yes, master. I have already spread my clones in the entire village. As long as they say the secret word Beetlejuice 3 times, then I will appear in their shadow, and they can communicate any emergency that befell them. Michael inwardly shook his head. It turned out that ChatJK 2 not only gave the little bugger anime tropes, but movie tropes as well. But since it didn't matter, Michael chose to ignore it. Okay, good. Fudge jumped up on Lolo's head and excitedly raised his head. I hope there's some talented recruits next time. No offense, but all the mankeys in this village have boring talents. None of them want to join me in becoming part of my shadow army. Boss Fudge, if anyone in our village exhibits any desire to become a ninja, as you call it, then I will inform you immediately, Lolo said, as if trying to pacify the slime. Really? Good. I'm looking forward to it. Michael was glad that everything in the village was going well. According to Lolo, everyone was enjoying their current way of life. They could drink water with just a single twist of a lever. They had a roof over their heads that protected them from the heat of the sun, and they could eat food and fruits every day. This was everything they ever needed. Every single hobmankey inwardly decided to do everything they could for Michael in this village. They worked harder than ever to contribute their talents to keeping the village well-fed and safe. The days passed, with every mankey working on their own project in the village. There was one mankey in particular whom Michael entrusted a very special job to. He was Kong. Right now, this particular hobmankey ran through the village with an excited look on his face. He sidestepped away from An's crops, jumped over the wooden carriage full of limestone, and ignored Lolo's warning of civility inside the village. Kong didn't care. He wanted to tell Michael the good news. He entered Michael's house and saluted at Fudge, who was practicing his ninja moves by the side of the kitchen. Then, he directly jumped into the second floor and burst through the master bedroom. Boss, it's working, Kong said with a voice faltering from excitement. Michael immediately got up from his bed and looked at Kong, with excitement growing on his face by the second. It's working, he asked Kong. It's working, boss, Kong replied. The two of them didn't need any explanation. They both ran out of the house and ran through the half-finished houses in the village. Kong had to go through the same obstacles as before, while Michael simply flew through the air and immediately headed toward a large square building in the distance. The structure was made out of concrete, with white smoke coming out of the exhaust vents at the roof. This was Michael and Kong's biggest project, the steam turbine. They worked together to construct a working generator that allowed them to harvest heat energy and turn it into usable electrical energy. They had to experiment and plan out the whole thing multiple times to make sure that everything had gone correctly. and yesterday, the last touches were finally constructed with the help of the other Hobmanki engineers. Early in the morning, Kong performed the last safety checks before finally informing Michael that the steam turbine was ready to turn on. They both rushed inside the control room and saw a couple of other engineer Hobmankis pacing back and forth as they waited for Michael and Kong to arrive. Finally, it was time for them to see the fruits of their hard labor. "Boss, you have the honors," Kong said as he presented the lever to Michael. Michael nodded and lifted the lever, which required quite a bit of strength to push. Thankfully, he was already quite strong, even as a 10-year-old child. As he pushed it to the on position, a satisfying click resounded throughout the control room, letting them know that the flint had successfully lit up the fire that would start to burn the fuel inside the compartments. Michael used his supreme skill, mana gathering, to see through the layers and layers of metal in the contraption. After igniting the fire, the water started to come to a boil, and upon reaching 100 degrees Celsius, or the water's boiling point, steam started to rise into one of the vents that directed everything into the turbine. Since there was quite a large amount of steam flowing into this relatively small vent, the speed and pressure from this steam were enough to propel the turbine into rotating an extremely fast speed. This was where the magic happened. Slowly, the generator attached to the turbine started to emanate lightning mana, signaling the steam turbine's success in turning heat into electricity. But that wasn't enough. For them to know that the steam turbine was working properly, they all looked at a single light bulb placed in the middle of the control room. They all waited with bated breaths as the light bulb started flickering. And finally, it turned on and emitted a glow that lit up the entire room. "We did it!" The entire room erupted in celebrations of joy and relief. There was hugging, jumping, and shouting spread throughout all of them. "Boss, it's done. You were right." They couldn't believe that Michael's promise of being able to harness the power of electricity had come true. There was no magic required in this whole process, and only needed natural resources readily available in their surroundings. With this steam turbine, they could have light bulbs powering the whole village, even in the middle of the night. Michael was a little emotional as well. It only took 10 years, but he was finally able to have electricity in his life. He took a major leap in making life in this world a lot more comfortable than before. There were a lot of inventions he had in store that could only work with electricity. He would only be able to start working on them after today. "Thank you, guys. We all worked hard for this," he said to Kong and the rest of the engineers. "But our job still isn't over." Then he pointed at the window to the side of the room, showing the entirety of the village in view. "We need to start connecting each and every house with electricity. Kong, we have the electric lines ready, right?" The chief engineer nodded his head. "Yes, boss. I have already instructed other engineers to line up the houses with wires. We just need to connect them all to the power source." Michael nodded. Now was the time to show everyone the power of electricity. In the afternoon, Michael had Lolo gather everyone in the village to start the presentation of electricity. All the Hobmankis gathered at the plaza in the middle of the village. They all waited patiently in their places as the sun soon set in the distance and night covered the entire skyline. Everyone was instructed to put out every candlelight in their houses, so the entire village was filled with darkness. "What's happening?" asked one of the Hobmanki children. "Shush, child. Our boss says that he has something amazing to show us," said his parents. But even still, there were a lot of Mankis who became a little bit restless as they waited in the darkness. Just then, Michael's calming voice resounded through the plaza, making everyone excited. "Sorry for making you all wait, but it's worth it, I promise. Without further ado, I will now give you the results of what we have all been working on. Kong, turn it on." With a single click, a blinding light overcame the Hobmankis. The child Hobmanki winced and closed his eyes. He was a little bit afraid because he wasn't expecting such a bright light when the sun had already gone down a few hours ago. But then, he started hearing gasps and awes of amazement. "Wow, I can't believe it. It's beautiful. Nicola, look at this." The child, upon hearing the emotional voices of his parents, slowly opened his eyes. And as his gaze adjusted to the light, he was met with the beautiful sight of their village lit up with stars everywhere. He gasped, unable to catch his breath upon seeing this amazing scenery. Michael instructed there to be miniature bulbs to be placed in wires and wrapped around the houses, just like Christmas lights back in his previous life. This made it seem like their village was graced with the presence of stars in the night sky. Everyone in the village quickly got hooked on using electricity in their daily lives. Now that they had this new power source, they no longer had to manually pump water up to the water tank for the entire village. Everything was now powered through an electric pump that supplied the plumbing system with water, automatically refilling it whenever the water had been used up. Water, which had been so scarce in their lives before, was now so abundant that there was a large fountain in the middle of the plaza that continuously entertained the Hobmankeys. Lolo watched with a warm gaze as the children played and splashed around in the fountain, drenching themselves in water. Because of Michael, children no longer had to feel the same hardships they experienced when they were kids. They had all the water they needed, and so much more that they had the luxury of washing their bodies every day. He sighed and looked at the horizon of the parched lands. Guilt started to rise in his chest. Here he was enjoying life without any worries. Yet there were still a lot of yellow mankeys still suffering out there in the desert without even a drop of water to drink. He could only hope that they would soon find this paradise and be blessed with Michael's gift. Out in the middle of nowhere, with the horizon full of nothing but an endless desert, one single yellow mankey was trudging through the dry soil. His body was emaciated, with his skin flaking from dryness. It had been days since he traveled out of his village to find the mythical oasis, a place full of water and life. But he soon found out that this was nothing more than a dream. There were only bones out there for mankeys who ventured out into the desert with the same futile dream as him. He was about to give up and just return to his village. But just then he saw something in the distance. The heat of the sun turned everything blurry for the mankey, but he was sure that he witnessed other creatures walking in the desert. He walked closer until he finally came across a strange, new species whose fur seemed to glow and shine under the sun. The mankey would have thought he came across his own species, but their straight posture and their human-like faces told him that they were different from himself. They were more powerful. Not only that, they seemed relaxed. Even when they wore strange clothes that covered their bodies, they didn't break a single sweat under the intense heat of the sun. They had a casual attitude, as if trudging through the harsh and dry desert was not a challenge, but an easy stroll in the morning. Compared to the mankey, these creatures were laughing and having fun. They weren't hanging on for dear life. Then, the mankey saw one of the creatures take out a single bottle from his pocket. Slosh! Even in the distance, the mankey could recognize that sound. It was water. The creature took a big gulp from the bottle and drank all the water he wanted to drink. The mankey couldn't help but gulp with a dry throat as he watched the creature quench his thirst. Then, something incredulous happened. The creature began to douse himself with the water, letting it drip out of his face and fall to the ground, completely wasting this life-saving resource. The mankey couldn't believe it. If his throat hadn't dried, he would have shouted at the creature for wasting water. Even if he already had his fill, the creature could have saved that water for his other comrades. Just as the mankey thought that, the other creatures took out their own bottles as well and began splashing themselves in water to try and beat the heat. Finally, the mankey built up the courage to approach these creatures. "Benevolent beings, please spare water for me," the mankey begged, his head almost buried in the ground. The hobmankeys all looked at him and saw the horrible state he was in. "I am willing to become slave for water, please." Before he could continue to beg and prostrate himself even more, he suddenly felt a cool sensation in his head. He looked up and saw a wooden bottle of water near his forehead. "You don't look well. Here, drink all the water you need," said the hobmankey. The mankey carefully took the bottle and took his first sip. It was truly water, and they gave it to him without even asking for anything in return. The mankey soon began filling himself with water. He didn't even let go of the last drops inside the bottle and drank it all before finally heaving a sigh of relief. "Achoo!" the mankey uttered, lying on the ground, completely filled. Gracious beings, I thank you. The Hobmankeys shrugged their shoulders. They seemed to have learned from Michael himself that this was a gesture that meant, "You're welcome. I am willing to give my life to serve benevolent beings," said the Mankey. But the Hobmankeys shook their heads. "There's no need for that. We have plenty of water to spare." Upon hearing this, the Mankey was only led to one conclusion. They found the mythical oasis in the middle of the desert. If he could lead his village to this place, then they would be saved from death. "Please tell me how you obtained this water. I need to save my village. Please tell me. Where is oasis?" The Mankey knew that this was a long shot. After all, if these creatures did find the oasis, they wouldn't want to share it with anybody else. They would hoard it for themselves. Even still, he had to try. In response, the Hobmankeys looked at each other. Even though they were only sent into the desert to find limestone, they were still instructed by Lolo to lead any lost Mankey into the village. "We don't know any oasis, but we do have a paradise. It's a place where water flows like rain, where food is abundant, and where stars come down into the ground at night. We can welcome you and your entire village. Do you want to see it?" An entire village of about 20 or so Mankeys traveled through the harsh desert for this supposed paradise. No sane creature would ever believe that this paradise was something real in the first place. They were told that in that place they could drink all the water they needed every day. They were told that if they lived there, they would never have to worry about going hungry at night. But perhaps the most unbelievable of all things was that anyone could obtain these privileges without having to pay for them at all. They just had to contribute their talents to the village. This group of Mankeys shouldn't have believed this story. It was too good to be true. But they were extremely desperate. The water they stored for the village had dried up, and it didn't seem like it would rain anytime soon. If they didn't take this chance, they would all soon die from dehydration. When they finally reached this paradise, they would quickly realize that they had made the right decision. They saw Hobmankeys working in construction, tending to crops, and doing all sorts of jobs in the very middle of the day when the sun was at its hottest. It was common knowledge for all Mankeys that they should only work early during the day or deep into the night so that the environment won't make them frequently thirsty. But these Hobmankeys didn't care at all. That was because they had water ready to drink at any time they wanted with just a single twist of a lever from those strange metal contraptions installed on the walls of every home. "Ah, you must be the new Mankeys. Welcome." Lolo led the new batch of Mankeys inside the territory and showed them everything there was to see in the village. They were given all the water they wanted and all the food they wanted to eat. And most of all, he showed them the magic of electricity. Every house was lined with light bulbs that illuminated everything even when the sun couldn't reach them. It truly seemed as if the stars fell down and settled into this land. It didn't take long before the Mankeys all prostrated themselves to Lolo, begging and asking for him to allow their village to integrate into this paradise. They were willing to become slaves just for the chance to at least get some water for their village. They were even willing to just sleep outside in the open just to be in the vicinity of this paradise. Lolo had to quickly tell them that migrating to this village was free. If they wanted to live here and get all the benefits as well, then they could do so without any conditions. But of course, as Mankeys, they had to do something after receiving this gift. They had to repay this graciousness. If you want to contribute to this village, then you must visit the boss, the one who founded this paradise for everyone to live in comfort. He will awaken talents you can use to help this village grow," Lolo said with a smile. Michael welcomed the new Mankeys into the village by evolving them into Hobmankeys and unearthing the hidden talents within their species. As expected, each and every single one of them had talents in production. And with the help of Lolo, they were quickly given jobs that were appropriate to their awakened skills. Some went to Kong for engineering training. Some went to join the seamstresses to provide clothes for the entire village. And thankfully, they also had a lot of herders who were able to tend to livestock for food. Right now, the entire village finally reached the 3-digit number and was continuing to grow each and every week that passed. This wasn't the first batch of Mankeys that joined them in this village. All the scouting done by the Hob Mankeys had allowed more tribes to migrate here and live a better life. This meant that the construction of houses became an ever-growing project that continued to make Kong busy every day. It helped that there were a lot more awakened engineer Hob Mankeys, but the projects were still a lot for them to take in. And since there were a lot more inhabitants in the village, the consumption of electricity had also shot up. Thankfully, the Mankeys continued to search the desert for oil wells that they could gather for fuel in the steam turbine. Michael had to create about 5 more automobiles just to help ease the burden of mining and gathering resources in the desert. 2 automobiles were used to gather oil, 2 were used to gather limestone, and 2 were used to search for more tribes and transport them into the village. Because of this, the production of concrete became much easier. Almost the entire village now had concrete flooring, except of course the new expanding houses under construction for the newly evolved Hob Mankeys. Michael also had Kong working on a concrete factory, which was on its way to becoming finished as well. He was getting nearer to the day that he could finally sell concrete as a Reborn product. Of course, he still had to think up a way to market this strange new building material, but that was a problem for another day. Michael planned to take a rest after evolving this last Mankey. But then Michael noticed his ability. It wasn't an S-class talent or anything, but the skill he gained from the evolution was something that gave Michael an extremely good idea. He immediately awakened the Mankey's talent and asked him for a favor. "I want you to use your skill and find that material," he said to the new Hob Mankey. "As you wish," he replied. With the help of Lolo, the new Hob Mankey immediately went to work and was accompanied by several other Mankeys in search of this precious material in the desert. A day later, the Hob Mankey returned to Michael's estate and showed him a strange rock-like crystal with a yellowish color. Michael smiled as he took the crystalline rock in his hands. Even though it smelled like rotten eggs, he was the only one who knew the true value of this element. This was sulfur, an incredibly important material for his next project. "You know what I'm thinking, right, ChatJK2? I have downloaded the formula into your brain," replied his personal AI assistant. With this, he would be able to create something incredibly amazing. It was the perfect gift for his mother's upcoming birthday. Lilia sighed as she looked out the window of the Vanderbilt estate. It had already been a few months since Michael left their home, but she had already been feeling quite lonely without her son since day one. Feeling bored, she got up out of her bed and started to wander around their mansion. Everything reminded her of him. She walked to the kitchen house and saw the maids washing the dishes using the faucets Michael made. She went outside to see Sebastian and the other butlers playing chess during their break times. There was a clear absence within their group, with the middle chair remaining vacant for Michael. Then, she went to the backyard to look at the training yard. She used to have early morning magic sessions with Michael here, every day. And even though she had nothing left to teach him, he still patiently absorbed her teachings without feeling bored. She walked to the hot springs, and the hot steam coming out of the roof reminded her of the daily baths with Michael. He would always act shy about entering the women's section, but would always end up caving to her whims and bathing with her. She didn't have any mood to take a bath right now, so she returned to their bedroom and lay down on her bed. Perhaps the thing that she missed the most about Michael was all his strange stories and ideas that came to him in his dreams. Every night, before they went to sleep, Michael would visit the master bedroom and tell them about a parallel world he dreamed of in his sleep. In that world, humans lived without any sort of magic in their bodies and were entirely reliant on technology. And despite the simpleness of life without magic, he would always describe that parallel world as something even more amazing than magic. Creativity reigned supreme rather than strength. Over there, people worshipped and idolized men and women who could sing or dance much better than others. He even said that if she had been born there, she would have been quite popular as an actress or an idol in the entire world. He told them all about the special occasions in that world, including a day for lovers, a day for independence, a day for the birth of some kind of god, and a day for the advent of a new year. During those occasions, everyone could see glowing flowers in the skies. This captured Lilia's imagination. She even wished she could peek through Michael's mind, just so that she could see the magnificence of those glowing flowers that exploded out into the skyline. Michael's stories made her wonder what she would have been like in that parallel world. Would she have been able to witness those flowers blossom on her birthday? She chuckled at herself for thinking about such foolish things. Michael was so good at storytelling that it made her want to see something that was only present in fantasy stories. Ah, I miss Michael. I hope he's here tomorrow. Her words were just something she uttered to herself. But, of course, I'll be here, Mom. It's your birthday, Michael said as he suddenly appeared behind her. Lilia was so surprised that she ended up jumping out of her bed. Her eyes widened as she saw Michael present in the flesh. She slowly approached him, with her hands stretched out to touch his face. And as she made contact with his cheeks, she felt his warmth in her hands. This was real. This wasn't a hallucination. Michael was back in the mansion. She jumped towards him, embracing him with all the pent-up energy she had from his months-long absence. Mom? Having trouble breathing here, but she ignored him and kept him in her embrace. Finally, after she filled her yearning for her son, she let go of him and grabbed his shoulders. I knew you wouldn't forget my birthday, she said ecstatically. Of course, Mom. I wouldn't miss it, he replied, scratching his nose with a little bit of a blush. How did you get here? She asked. Did you travel for days in your automobile? Michael cleared his throat. Before you ask me that, Mom, I would like to show you something first. It's my birthday gift to you. He led her out onto the balcony of the master bedroom, which overlooked the entire estate and all the forestry around it. The sun had already set a few hours ago, and there was only darkness in the distant skies. Strangely enough, the entire estate was enveloped in darkness as well. The lampposts that were supposed to be lit with fire around the estate were completely snuffed out. Did Beretta forget to light up the oil lamps? Lilia asked herself, looking down at the garden. No, Mom. I asked her to extinguish all the lights for tonight. I want to show you something, Michael explained. What are you planning? She asked, a little bit suspicious. Michael pointed at the sky and said, Keep your eyes there, Mom. She did as he said, and heard him whisper a countdown for himself. 3, 2, 1. TSHHH. Suddenly, a single line of fire emerged from the darkness of the forest and soared up into the skies. And as it reached the zenith, the fire suddenly exploded into a beautiful amalgamation of reddish colors, blossoming into a full flower in the skies. Lilia gasped. She couldn't believe her eyes. Before long, a few more lines of fire shot out from the forest and exploded into the sky, creating a bouquet of colorful flowers for Lilia to enjoy. After discovering sulfur in the parched lands, Michael was able to create the infamous gunpowder. With just a couple more ingredients, he was able to create fireworks. His gift to Lilia made her heart feel warm inside, tears welling up in her eyes. This looked even better than in her imagination. She couldn't believe that Michael was able to show her something she thought she would never be able to see. She kissed Michael on the forehead and smiled. Thank you, son. I love it, she said, wiping the tears away from her eyes. And so, the mother and son enjoyed the fireworks show for the rest of the night with nothing but silence. Wait a minute, Michael, Lilia said. You never told me how you got here. Michael laughed awkwardly as he scratched his head. I have my own clone shadow attached to Michael 2 all this time as well. This allowed me to take its place and arrive here in an instant. Huh. Isn't that cool, Mom? Lilia went silent. Mom, so you're telling me that you could have always been here this entire time? Lilia uttered with a low voice, with her blonde hair masking her expression. Michael started backing away. He needed an excuse. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. That wasn't a viable response. The chaos in the mansion was masked by the sounds of fireworks blowing off in the skies. As a punishment, he was forced to visit them at least 3 times a week to continue his stories about the parallel world from his dreams. A week after visiting the Vanderbilt estate for his mother's birthday, Michael wanted to see the current state of the Reborn company in Kingsbridge. As Castell wrote company reports in her office, the candle suddenly flickered and her shadow morphed into something completely different. Castell, I'm coming to visit. Michael's voice sounded out through her office, notifying her of his presence. She immediately fixed her posture and turned around to welcome the young master. She bowed down to the corner of the room, where Michael magically appeared out of nowhere. "It has been a while, young master," Castell said. "Sorry, I got busy with stuff in the parched lands. I'll try to visit Kingsbridge more often now that I've got more help." Before he left, Michael left everyone he knew a clone of himself in their shadows. This was a superior version of Fudge's skills, which allowed Michael to transfer his true body to any of his clones no matter the distance between them. This made traveling back and forth to Kingsbridge and the parched lands extremely easy. "How is our company doing?" Michael asked as he took a peek at the window, showing the office floor of the company. There had been a huge influx of workers in the building from the last time he visited this place. It looked like Castell had to hire a lot more people to manage the growing business of Reborn. "The company's doing extremely well, young master. The entirety of Kingsbridge has now been lined with our plumbing system, allowing them easy access to water. The profits we have garnered from the installation alone have netted us more than 10 million gold coins. We have also implemented a subscription-based water filtration system that you envisioned. Every month, we gain hundreds of thousands of gold coins from the citizens wanting to drink water straight from the tap." Michael nodded to himself. Slowly, Kingsbridge was reaching closer and closer to the quality of living in his previous life. Although they had to pay a water bill every month, it was worth it because they were kept safe from deadly diseases and plagues. "How about the sewer system?" Michael asked. "Everything in that front is doing as we expected, young master. The construction was finished without a hitch." Castell showed Michael the report papers regarding the whole project. He inspected everything with ChatJK2 and saw that everything had gone as well as they planned. With the help of Cerberus and the Magic Tower, the quality of work was assured from the very start. "Because of our efforts, the rate of diseases in the city had gone down substantially," Castell said with vigor. Fudge briefly popped out of Michael's shadow. "My clones inspect no kind of plague spreading in the city, master. Thanks to the goddess's timely warning, they were able to completely stop the decimation of humans in the city. Not only that, but the surrounding territories around Kingsbridge have also contacted us with requests to implement the same sewer and plumbing system in their area," Castell said, pointing to the mountain of letters in her desk from the overlords and governors of those territories. "I must admit, young master, this subscription-based system is nothing short of genius. If we start to implement the plumbing system in more and more homes, the monthly fees we earn will continue to grow each year. The huge influx of money will allow us to fully expand into the King's region and hopefully break into the Queen's region." The country they were in was divided into different regions. Kingsbridge City and Michael's home estate were both located in the King's region. Below the King's region was only the parched lands. On its left and right were surrounded by oceans, but above it was the region called Queen's region. If they wanted to continue growing the Reborn company into a worldwide business, then they needed to first conquer the entire country. And to do that, they needed to expand into the Queen's region to have access to the rest of the country. "How is it?" Michael asked. "Have we had any success in reaching the Queen's region?" He asked this because the Queen's region was hard to get into, solely because of the mountain ranges that separated the two regions. Peddlers needed to trek through dangerous valleys and landslide-prone areas just to reach the Queen's region. "We've had success in spreading our products there," replied Castell. "The only problem is the speed of our expansion. Because of the hard terrain, we can only transport soap and matchsticks in that area for now. After all, we produce all the products here at Kingsbridge and have them transported all the way there. Faucets and pipes are hard to transport properly, so we can't implement the plumbing system there yet. It will be a lot easier once we construct the main branch in the Queen's region, which would be helped by all the money we gain from our projects." Michael thought hard about the problem plaguing Castell. He instructed ChatJK2 to give him a mental image of the country's map to give him a better view of the situation. From the looks of it, the only thing preventing their expansion was the hard landscape of the mountain regions. Then his eyes went over to the empty space beside the mountains, devoid of any treacherous terrain. "Look at this," he said to Castell, projecting the country map into the air. "Why can't we just go through this section beside the mountains?" Castell inspected the map and shook her head. "It's not possible, young master. That is inhabited by an infamous dwarven kingdom. They are not friendly to humans and have always rejected any attempt from humans trying to enter their territory." Michael, hearing this, knew that they couldn't force the dwarven kingdom to open their gates for the Reborn company. They would just have to find another way for now. "Oh, Castell, I forgot. The reason why I visited you this time is because I have another product I want you to sell. It's called concrete." Michael went back to the parched lands after talking to Castell about the next plans for the Reborn company. After telling her about the uses of concrete, she quickly caught on and knew that it was going to be a big hit. However, Castell decided that before they started to sell concrete, they should make sure that there would be a steady stream of it readily available in stock. She already learned her lesson after things got too hectic in their office after they announced the plumbing system a few months back. She underestimated just how much the demand would be for the faucets and showers in Kingsbridge, leading the Reborn offices to become extremely hectic as they tried their hardest to keep up with the demand. They had to spend a lot more money than they expected just to hire more workers in the meantime. Castell predicted that the demand for concrete would be the same, if not larger, than the plumbing system. After all, with concrete, it was possible to construct a 10-foot-tall wall around Kingsbridge in a matter of days. That short time frame was extremely absurd. Coupled with its strength, durability, and cheapness compared to other materials, everyone would rather use concrete to construct their buildings. So, Michael and Castell both decided to first create a proper road from the parched lands to the Vanderbilt estate to easily transport the concrete that Michael's village was going to create. With a highway directly connecting the two places, Castell could easily receive enough shipments of concrete within a week of its creation. Of course, this meant that Michael had to customize a large truck automobile for this shipment. He already planned to ask for Kong's help in creating this new vehicle, which would speed up the creation process for the new car. Another benefit of creating a highway road was that the village could easily procure materials they needed from Castell. There were a lot of things that Michael and the village needed in the parched lands that they couldn't acquire naturally. There were things such as spices for food, seeds for the farm, and other exotic materials that they could only get using Reborn's large purchasing power in the human realm. So, he had Castell coordinate with Lolo for the exchange of goods for the village. They agreed that every other week, a group of Mankeys would travel to the Vanderbilt estate to pick up the products sent by Castell. This would greatly help the expansion of the village, especially with the large influx of newly evolved Hobmankeys. So after his conversation with Castell, Michael had taken care of everything he could take care of for now. Somewhere out there, between the valleys of the mountain ranges separating the King's region and the Queen's region, the ground began trembling with furious intensity. Trees were uprooted from the ground. Birds and animals fled from their habitats in search of more stable ground. Even the established route of peddlers became nothing more than a collection of loose ground. The intensity of this earthquake broke off large chunks out of the mountains, which began to roll down its cliffs towards the land below. But even as the hours passed, the intensity only became even greater than before, unshackling the stable mountains from their position. A landslide of unprecedented proportions overcame a large portion of the boundary between the King's region and the Queen's region, rendering it unpassable for the time being. However, that was not all that was affected. The Dwarven Kingdom, known for their mastery in metallurgy, was left unable to defend against the onslaught of the tsunami-like landslide that came unexpectedly. It didn't help that all of this unfolded deep into the night, where most dwarves were either asleep or drowning themselves in ale. But of course, due to their sturdy construction practices, their buildings were able to survive the first wave of the landslide, giving them time to evacuate from the affected areas. The dwarves could only watch helplessly as their homes and forges became mere rubble from the rush of the landslide. Even though it was made up of nothing but muddy soil and rock from the mountains, the speed at which they came to their territory was enough to destroy most of their dwarven structures in a matter of minutes. Meanwhile, the Dwarven King was awakened from his deep sleep and informed of the current situation. He quickly assembled his greatest engineers and blacksmiths to try and assess the damage done to his kingdom. After a long meeting, the general consensus within the dwarves was that it would take at least a month just to rebuild part of their wall taken down by the landslide. It would take even more months for them to start reconstructing the homes and forges of the unfortunate dwarves caught up in this mess. Even though no dwarf was harmed by this disaster, the dwarven king couldn't help but stroke his long braided beard out of worry. After all, with the wall destroyed and thousands upon thousands of dwarves out of homes, their kingdom was now vulnerable to the outer world. This was a problem that they couldn't solve even with their current advancements in their craftsmanship. So, the dwarven king stayed on his throne, solemnly in deep thought as he tried to think of a solution to his current problem. After a few days, news quickly spread to the territories next to the dwarven kingdom. Particularly, this reached the ears of the greatest businessman in the current world, Eyes Vanderbilt. The old man smiled as his advisors informed him of the situation. "Send a delegate to the dwarven king," he said decisively. "Tell him we're ready to provide him with all the funds, materials, and manpower to help him rebuild his kingdom." Eyes immediately knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance for him to finally break through that stubborn old dwarven king. Even in his successful history as the Vanderbilt Lion, the greatest businessman in the world, Eyes had always failed to spread his business to the dwarven kingdom. They rejected any human that tried to bring their company into his realm. But now he saw a chance. If he could gain the favor of the dwarven king, Eyes could finally get the chance to exchange business and receive exclusive product from the dwarves. Although unlikely, he still had to take a chance. Success meant he would be written down in history as the first man to ever do so, right? Discover Stories with Empire. Michael was lying on his bed in the parched lands when all of a sudden he felt a disturbance in the air. He quickly sat up and used his supreme skill, mana gathering, allowing him to gaze past reality and peer through the invisible elemental mana present in his vicinity. From what he could see, there was no immediate danger inside the village or even in the parched lands. The distress seemed to have come from a faraway land, somewhere away from the king's region. He immediately checked in on his family with his clones and was relieved to find out that they were fine, with his mother and father sleeping deeply into the night. Chat JK2, can you tell me what happened? According to the agitation of earth mana in the surroundings, there was a large displacement in the tectonic plates of the very ground itself, leading to the shifting of the land. After some calculations, I have deduced the problem to have occurred near the border between the King's and Queen's region, directly on the mountain ranges separating the two. With such a large change in landscape, Michael was sure that there could have been a lot of innocent people caught up unprepared from this natural disaster. When he looked at the country map in his mind, he saw that there were a couple of dwarven villages directly bordering the mountain ranges that could have been affected the most by the earthquake. He immediately changed places with his clone in Castell Shadow, transporting his real body to Reborn's main office in Kingsbridge City. "Sorry to bother you so late this night," Michael said as he appeared behind Castell, who seemed to have been burning the midnight oil. "It's no worries, young master. I was just finishing up some paperwork for our eventual expansion to the Queen's region," she said, with clear-eyed bags above her cheeks. "Sorry to say this, but I think you're going to have to postpone that for a little bit. Something has happened in the mountains." Michael explained everything ChatJK2 told him to Castell. Being the sharp business manager that she was, Castell immediately knew that a lot of businesses would get disturbed by this disaster. And most unfortunate of all was the Dwarven Kingdom, which seemed to have taken the full brunt of the earthquake's aftermath. "Can you send some people to see if there are any families affected by this? I want to help them," Michael said with worry on his face. Castell immediately nodded her head. "I will send for some of our employees to scout the area as soon as possible. I will send word to you when we have more information." Michael knew that with such a large disaster, time was of the essence. This couldn't wait till tomorrow morning. He closed his eyes and sensed all of his clones hiding in the shadows of other people. "Chat JK2, can you find me a clone nearest to the Queen's region?" "Certainly. There is one single reborn peddler currently trying to bypass the landslide region. I'll be going now, Castell. I have to see this for myself, he said as his body suddenly turned into pure darkness that soon merged back into Catel's shadow. Michael emerged out of the reborn peddler's shadow, who continued to walk away from the landslide, none the wiser that Michael had just magically appeared behind him. The soles of his feet burst out with air mana as he started to float in the air, allowing him to traverse the landslide with ease. He looked down and saw what seemed to be a spilled muddy soup made out of unrooted trees and large boulders, leading towards the dwarven kingdom in the distance. His eyes shone with a golden light as he activated his supreme skill, trying to sense the presence of light mana in the area. Thankfully, the absence of dark mana told him that there weren't any casualties from this disaster. He continued to float forward, looking down and trying to sense for any survivors looking for help. After a few minutes, he came across what looked to be the remnants of a small village. Roofs of stone houses were peeking out of the muddy landslide. Chimneys were sticking out of the wreckage, and there was even a metal statue of the Dwarven King floating among the debris of metal and stone that once made up this village. After further inspection, he saw a large collection of light mana hiding inside one of the houses that stood tall even with the onslaught of the landslide. Michael slowly floated down and inspected the dwarven architecture. They seemed unable to escape the house because of all the debris and scrap blocking the entrance. With a single wave of his hand, Michael created a giant magical hand made out of pure mana called Mage Hand, which easily shoveled away all the dirt and mud obstructing the door. Once everything was gone, he stepped into the entryway and knocked on the door. Slowly, the wooden door creaked open, showing the presence of a burly dwarf with a brown braided beard. The dwarf adjusted his eyes as he looked at Michael. A human. I would have never expected a human to save us from our predicament. Upon saying those words, more and more dwarves peeked out of the door and gazed at Michael, the human that freed them from being buried alive. It wasn't that they were ungrateful, but they all expected a fellow dwarf to be the one to save them. But it seemed that this human valued their life more than other fellow dwarves. Otherwise, they would have been saved hours ago. Thank you, human. What is your name? The first dwarf offered his hand to Michael. Call me Michael, he said, shaking the dwarf's hand. My name is Thrain Ironhand. I and my fellow villagers must apologize for our behavior upon meeting you. We mean not to be rude, but as you can see, we are in a state of emergency. We have lost everything we have built up in all our lives. We have lost our homes, leaving us with no bed to sleep on. Michael didn't take their weird stares for rudeness. After all, they had just experienced something traumatic. Their entire village was laid to waste in a matter of seconds, and if they were any less alert, they could have lost their lives as well. We have nothing to offer, but please come inside, Thrain said, welcoming him to their safe haven. Michael entered the nearly wrecked house of the dwarves and saw an entire village of them crammed into this very small space. If it weren't for their small stature, they wouldn't have been able to fit into such a cramped place. After all, their numbers were nearing 3 digits. As dwarves, we are indebted to repay twofold what you have done for us. However, we are currently unable to fulfill that, Thrain said, looking apologetic. But Michael shook his head. There's no need to worry about that for now. It looks like you all have it rough. Everyone was taking turns to nibble on a single piece of bread. This was their only sustenance. Our pride wouldn't have accepted that, but you're completely right. Our village is completely destroyed, and we don't have anywhere else to go, Thrain said, sitting on the chair opposite Michael. Why not? Asked Michael. Aren't you a part of the Dwarven Kingdom? Wouldn't they help you reconstruct the village? Thrain and the others let out a groan. Unfortunately, their help would only come months and months later. We do not doubt that the Dwarven King is currently allocating all of his resources into rebuilding the walls before trying to rebuild villages in the outskirts of the kingdom. We do not blame him. His duty as king demands him to prioritize the walls over anything else. However, this leaves us with nowhere else to go. The dwarves looked extremely downtrodden as they thought of what the future would hold for them. They would be forced to relocate to a place that wasn't ravaged by the landslide and was bountiful with resources. However, finding this place would be an extremely hard task. After all, this country was primarily a realm for humans. Everything was already taken or conquered by them, leaving nothing for them to live in, even in the king's region. And they couldn't simply try to live with the humans. As demi-humans, dwarves were not normal in their society. This was especially true because it was their race who decided to shut themselves off from humans in the first place. So, Thrain and the rest of the dwarves would either have to search the ends of the continent, not conquered by humans, or take their chances overseas. We appreciate your help, Michael. But if we want to take our journey to the oceans, then we should better start now. If fate so decides it, then I hope we will meet again under better circumstances so that we can repay you for saving our lives. Thrain stood up from his chair and offered his hand to Michael. The rest of the dwarves also expressed their thanks to Michael before they started packing their things for their eventual journey away from the Dwarven Kingdom. But before they even finished packing, Michael faced them all and asked them one simple thing. If you're trying to find a place to stay, then why not stay in our village? Thrain and the rest of the dwarves looked at Michael, but instead of treating him seriously, they thought that it was just a meaningless gesture by a 10-year-old child. We appreciate it, Michael, but it isn't that simple. We cannot live in any human society because our customs and way of living are completely different from yours. We are also creatures of the metal, meaning that we will eventually want to recreate our own forges for smithing. So unless your house is located somewhere far away from human society, then we will politely decline. Michael smiled. Actually, he began to tell them all about his village in the parched lands, and how they had all the water, food, and space they needed to grow a large community of yellow mankeys. Thrain gave Michael a strange look. After all, his words were completely too good to be true. First of all, he said that yellow mankeys populated their community, where each of them had their own jobs and duty for the village. However, from what they knew, yellow mankeys were creatures of simple mind. And second, he said that the village was located in the parched lands. As the name suggested, it was a place that was devoid of water. But Michael said that their village had an abundance of both water and food for everyone to sustain themselves. It wasn't that they didn't trust Michael, but those words were truly too good to be true. It was exactly what they needed, as if the heavens simply rained down gold for them to take freely. Why not just take a visit to our village first? You are all going to journey out into the ocean anyway, right? You can take a slight detour and see the village for yourselves, Michael said, with the rest of the dwarves starting to believe his words. You have no reason to lie, Thrain pondered to himself. And it is as you said, we are going in that direction anyway. Continue your adventure with Empire. He and the rest of the adult dwarves all convened together to talk about their decision. After a few minutes, they all decided to do as Michael said. After all, they wouldn't lose anything if they did. Then, we will take you up on your offer, Thrain replied. Good. I already called in for help, and they would soon arrive in this location, Michael said, looking out into the distant Kingsbridge city. Michael, you have a carriage we can borrow? Thrain asked expectantly. This elicited a bright expression on the dwarves. After all, with a carriage, they wouldn't have to waste their energy walking great distances. I hope you brought quite a strong horse. We dwarves are quite hefty, huh? Thrain joked. Michael awkwardly scratched his head and said, Well, it has horsepower, that's for sure. Master, we couldn't pick you up. Out from the window of Michael's automobile, a certain edgy slime peeked out and waved at Michael with an overly big smile. Behind Fudge's car were 5 other cars, each manned by a skilled hobmanky driver capable of transporting goods from a large distance. After an hour, help had finally arrived. Each of the automobiles had a large wooden bed that had its own wheels attached to the back of the car. This cargo space was made specifically to carry large amounts of materials from Kingsbridge to the parched lands. Luckily enough, today was supposed to be the day that Castell would send supplies to the village, so the 6 cars were already parked near Kingsbridge. This meant that they could reach the outskirts of the Dwarven Kingdom within a few hours. These are my automobiles. Hop on. We can reach the parched lands within just a few days. Despite Michael's words, the dwarves refused to move. They looked at the intricate and complex metal parts of the automobile and couldn't help but gasp at how advanced its construction was compared to anything they had ever seen. Not only that, Michael's carriages seemed to move with great speed despite having no horses powering its wheels. How is it moving? It's magic, right? How else could it move without a horse? But there's not even an ounce of magic in that metal contraption. They couldn't understand it. Even as proud blacksmiths, they felt like they were looking at something completely alien and out of this world whenever they stared at the automobiles. It was simply beyond anything that even the best blacksmiths and craftsmen could make in the Dwarven Kingdom. Thrain built up the courage to slowly approach the automobile. Vroom! Upon hearing the loud thrum of the engine, he couldn't help but jump back in surprise. It was alive. It was alive, not in the sense that it was a living being like dwarves, humans, or even monsters. No, from what he could see, it seemed as if the metal construct itself was alive, without being alive. Michael, what is this beast of yours? How is it possible that something lifeless is able to breathe like it was filled with life? Thrain uttered with a low voice. He carefully stroked his hand against the cold metal of the vehicle and felt it breathe. To answer his question, Michael opened the hood and showed him and all the curious dwarves the inner workings of his automobile. This part is called an engine. It uses the power of combustion. He briefly explained to them about the principles of an internal combustion engine. This is called the axle, and it allows the engine to power the wheels and make it move. It also allows the wheels to move and steer in a different direction. And as Michael continued to explain everything about the car, the dwarves couldn't help but feel as if they were hearing something completely out of their depths. Michael mentioned principles and theories with such casualness that other people might have thought that everything he said was common knowledge. Yet, even a single idea of his was enough to advance the current understanding of mechanics in the Dwarven Kingdom. This blows my mind. I feel like a baby. This completely changes my perspective on everything metallurgy. No offense, but I'm simply baffled at the fact that a human child was able to create such a magnificent piece of machinery. The hobmankeys on the front seat of the cars couldn't help but chuckle to themselves. Finally, someone else understood their surprise whenever their boss created something completely out of this world. Foo, you guys haven't seen anything yet, bragged Fudge. I can't wait to see your faces when you see the light bulbs in our village. Light bulbs? Uttered the dwarves in confusion. All right, enough of that, Fudge. We should get going, Michael said as he started to lead the dwarves into the car. They started their journey down south, towards the parched lands. The duration of their journey would be the same, if not shorter, than the travel between Kingsbridge and the parched lands. On the way, the dwarves couldn't help but laud Michael for his invention of the automobile. It was even faster and more stable than the most expensive of carriages, making this to be the best form of transportation in the world. Enjoy new tales from Empire. The days passed, and they finally reached the desert landscape of the parched lands. And immediately, the dwarves caught sight of the supposed village on the horizon. It was unlike anything they had ever assumed. They thought that a village in the parched lands would be made out of mud and clay. But somehow, this village would look indistinguishable from most human settlements. Welcome home, boss. Lolo was there to greet the new inhabitants of the village, showing their hospitality by giving the dwarves bottles of water and fruits to soothe the long journey they experienced. The dwarves could only stare and gape in wonder as they looked at Michael's village. Hobmankeys were walking on flat, solid footing, devoid of any mud or dust that was so prevalent in the parched lands. Many of them were walking on well-designed streets that were divided into organized blocks. There were also other hobmankeys strolling through the streets using a strange and thin metal contraption with only 2 wheels. This looked like an advanced civilization that should not exist in the vastness of this desert. Yet it did. There were farms on the outskirts of the territory, with hobmankeys carefully tending to their crops. There were hobmankeys busy with construction work using a strange material. And most surprising of all were the children happily playing on the streets, splashing themselves with water without a care in the world. Brothers, I can't believe a place like this exists. I thought our dwarven kingdom had reached the peak of civilization. I thought wrong. Is this really going to be our new place? Michael looked at the numerous dwarves in front of him and spread his arms. Welcome to our village. Make yourselves at home. Lolo led the dwarves to their new temporary home and showed them all the amenities that came with it. Thrain and the rest of the dwarves jumped up and almost cursed the high heavens when Lolo flicked the switch mounted on the wall and turned on the bright light in the living room. By my beard, what is that light? They couldn't believe that such a bright light could be emitted from such a small, glowing wire. And just like before, there was nothing magical about it either. It was as natural as the air, which confused them even more. Michael had to teach them the basics of electricity and how everything was being powered through the steam turbine. Harnessing lightning. Who would have thought that such a dangerous element could lead to such a useful source of power? Thrain said, staring at the light bulb for too long. The more they stayed in the village, the more they understood that this place was more advanced than even the richest metropolis in the world. Its technology was miles above that of the Dwarven Kingdom, just by virtue of the plumbing system by itself. Not to mention the electricity, everything they pulled off in this village was nothing more than fantasy for other places. And in terms of wealth, they had all of it as well. After all Hobmankeys could eat as much as they wanted, they could drink as much as they wanted, and they obtained everything they wanted from the village for free. Every Hobmankey contributed to the village's well-being, allowing all of them to live as freely as they did right now. One by one, groups of Hobmankeys visited the dwarves' abode and gave them little gifts and trinkets to welcome them into their village. The Hobmankeys gave them daily items like cups, plates, and other such objects that would make their lives comfortable in their new home. Some seamstresses also gave the dwarves well-knitted clothes and ponchos that fit them perfectly. They had the innate power to create comfortable clothes just by sight alone, which surprised the dwarves. Everyone in this village was powerful in their own right. They had knowledge, skill, and power which were characteristics that no demi-human should have obtained. What confused the dwarves the most was that Michael seemed to be surrounded by extremely talented individuals. This was far too much of coincidence. Not only that, but the Mankeys were also completely different from what they were taught. Everyone said yellow Mankeys were not complex enough to wield magic or smart enough to build even the simplest of tools. Yet, what they saw was the complete opposite. The engineers of this village were a lot smarter than even the proudest of blacksmith dwarves. This led them to become even more impressed at Michael, the human who started all of this in the first place. After getting acclimated to their surroundings, Michael let the dwarves wander around the village at their own discretion. They went through the farms, the steam turbine, and the plaza. As they were walking through the streets of the village, Thrain and the other dwarves suddenly heard the sound of a satisfying metal clink ring out from a distance. Then, this was followed by raucous cheering that seemed to emanate through the streets. "What's that?" Thrain asked. "Oh, that," Michael said with a bit of a smile. "That's just a little game that I spread to the villagers." It quickly became popular within the Hobmankeys, with most youths spending their time playing it during the day. "A game?" asked Thrain with curiosity. Michael answered by leading them towards a large field on the outskirts of the village. The area was diamond-shaped, with Hobmankeys placed in specific places on the 4 plates. The juvenile Hobmankey in the middle of the field had a serious look on his face as he stared down his opponent. Opposite him was another Hobmankey who wielded a metal bat, lightly swinging it in preparation for what was to come. The Hobmankey in the middle winded up his arm and threw the ball with such speed and ferocity that the wind whistled as it cleaved through the air. Just as the ball was about to go past the metal bat, the Hobmankey suddenly twisted his hips and brought power to his hands, allowing the bat to accurately hit the fastball, sending it flying through the air. The crowd of Hobmankeys watching on the sidelines and bleachers all screamed in excitement. "Home run!" They cheered as the Hobmankey with the bat rounded out the bases on the diamond field. Michael smiled as he pointed at the energized camaraderie between the players and the audience. "That is baseball," he proclaimed. The dwarves looked on at the game with a burning curiosity. Even though they didn't know the rules of the game, they were all taken by the intense focus and seriousness among the players. Not only that, but the energy oozing between them was palpable. Their joy upon hitting that ball to the ends of the horizon was nothing less than exhilarating. Experience more on Empire. After the game, the batter on the mound slowly approached Michael and the dwarves. He slowly took off his hat and showed himself to be Kong, the chief engineer of this village. "Boss, you came to see me win. I'm getting better, right? I'm sure I'll knock your ball right out of the park the next time we play a game," Kong said, his excitement showing on his face. "You still have a lot to learn, Padawan," Michael replied. "We'll play a game tonight, and I'll show you who's the ace." The dwarves couldn't believe the camaraderie and fellowship between everyone in the village. They all seemed to be united with this one game. Those who won showed happiness as if they had just won a war, and those who lost showed no sadness, only an intense desire to get better. And even still, they showed respect and admiration for each other regardless of the outcome. This sparked a desire for the dwarves to learn more about this strange game called baseball. Michael saw their curious looks and invited them to watch tonight's match with their own eyes. "You should see the game tonight," he said to them. "The Cleaving Chefs are fighting against the Brainiac Engineers." The sun soon set on the village, with darkness covering the whole landscape of the parched lands. Yet, there was one single patch of land in this desolate territory that was shining brighter than the stars in the sky. As soon as the night came, the village turned on the switches for the lights. The lamps by the side streets and the bulbs on the porches of houses illuminated everything for the inhabitants of the village, making it easy for them to go where they wanted even in the night. Lolo led Thrain and the rest of the dwarves, including the seniors and the children, through the crowded streets full of excited hobmankeys. As they walked alongside the hobmankeys, Thrain heard their excited conversations about the upcoming match. "Who do you think will win?" "I bet it's the Brainiac Engineers." "Kong is really good at batting," said an excited kid. "Tisk TSK, TSK. You know nothing, my man. Don't you know that our boss will sub in as the pitcher for the Cleavers?" "They'll win for sure," refuted the other kid. "Either way, I'm excited. It makes me want to play baseball again. Let's do it tomorrow. I'll invite the others." Anywhere the dwarves looked, they saw excited and expectant faces on the hobmankeys. All they seemed to talk about was baseball and everything related to it. Michael taught them everything there was to know about baseball, including its rules and regulations. So, they would easily be able to follow the upcoming game. However, they knew nothing about the two teams playing, the Cleaving Chefs and the Brainiac Engineers. Everyone formed a team based on their specialties, Lolo explained. For example, Kong and the rest of the engineers formed their own baseball team called the Brainiac Engineers. They pride themselves on being the most strategic. The Cleaving Chefs, on the other hand, is almost full of butchers who boast a really heavy hand perfect for knocking the ball into the air. This has led to the teams, as well as the fans that are rooting for their team to win, to become extremely competitive against each other, Lolo explained. And just as he said that, a group of hobmankeys wearing some kind of similar blue uniform faced off against another group of hobmankeys with a different red uniform. "You guys should go home now. Our engineers will cleave your chances of winning," said the blue-uniformed hobmankeys. "Huh, we'll make you eat your words. You won't be able to calculate where the ball ends up once our players knock it out of the park," answered the red-uniformed hobmankeys. The two different groups continued to answer taunts back and forth, livening up the energy of the night. It came to a point where even the dwarves ended up getting caught up in the debate between the two groups. "Ah, our new comrades," said the group rooting for the chefs. "Give 'em the fries. Give 'em the hot dogs." The dwarves were suddenly given all sorts of food and snacks from the group in an attempt to get them to their side. They were each given the same red uniform the group was wearing, with their names etched on the back along with a random number. "Hot dogs and fries are essential in a baseball game," said the red group. "If you side with us, you can eat all you want." The blue group answered by giving them their own blue uniform. "Well, if you side with us, we can adjust your homes to your liking." "That's cheating," answered the red group. "You were bribing them," replied the blue group. The debate continued and was only stopped after Lolo sent the two groups to their own designated spots on opposite sides of the bleachers. Lolo escorted the dwarves to their seats in the middle, which were considered the best seats in the game. Thrain looked around and felt as if he was in a fever dream. Everything felt surreal. The skies were dark, yet the whole field was lit up by huge, bright lights that illuminated the whole field and the bleachers. Everyone was at their seats, talking excitedly while eating snacks and drinking water to pass the time. Somehow, the dwarves felt like they were in another world. They had never experienced something like this before or even dreamed that this was possible. In a place of survival, they would have never thought that a pastime like this could even exist. After a few minutes, the players began taking their places on the field, with a hobmanki at the pitcher's mound, tossing the ball in his hand. Opposite him was a batter, who readied his metal bat and swung it a couple of times to keep himself warm. FWE! FWE! The whistle sounded out through the field, signaling the start of the game. On the first pitch, the batter swung his metal bat hard, barely missing the ball that whizzed past his body. Groans and sounds of disappointment rang out within the crowd. On the second pitch, another wild swing from the batter would let the ball crash at the catcher's mitt, garnering another groan from the audience. That means he has 2 strikes, right? Why isn't he hitting the ball? Asked Thrain, with a little bit of frustration showing in his bushy beard. You're not looking at the pitcher, answered the dwarf next to him. The speed and curve of the ball is not so easy to hit. It doesn't seem so, answered Thrain, feeling as if the ball was quite easy to knock out of the park. Just then, the batter swung his bat on the ball again, this time making contact. However, the ball flew in the other direction, making it a foul ball. Thrain shouted a little bit too loud, making himself feel embarrassed. Enjoy new stories from Empire. I just don't understand how he's missing these, he said. I think he should position his shoulders a little bit more to the left, like this. Thrain started to copy the batter's pose and swung his hand as if he were the one on the field. That won't work, my dear friend, answered the dwarf on his side. If I throw the ball fast enough, I doubt you'll be able to hit it as easily as you think. That's right, answered another dwarf. What are you guys talking about? As long as you keep your eye on the ball, anyone can hit it, no matter how fast it is, replied another dwarf. But what about a curve? The dwarves began to argue to themselves, leaving Lolo to chuckle to himself. The dwarves had taken a liking to the sport, it seemed. The game continued, with the Cleaving Chefs taking the early lead in the opening innings. But soon after, the Brainiac engineers proved their strategy of slow but steady paid off as they evened out the score. Finally, it was the bottom of the 9th inning. This was the last chance the 2 teams would get to score. The Chefs were pitching, while the engineers were batting. Kong was up at the plate, swinging his bat as he eyed the pitcher on the mound. This was a crucial moment, yet there was no nervousness in his face. He was excited. Finally, the pitcher threw the ball high up on the box, making it seem as if it was out. But Kong was not deceived. He charged his shoulders, swinging the bat a little bit below where the ball seemed to be going. And just as Kong predicted, the ball suddenly curved downwards, perfectly meeting the metal bat in the perfect spot, eliciting a very satisfying dink before sending the ball flying off into the air. Another home run, the crowd cheered. Kong and his 2 other teammates rounded out the bases, scoring a crucial 3 points for their team to take the lead. But of course, the Chefs didn't let the game be over yet. Finally, at the top of the 9th inning, they were the one to bat. This was their final chance to decide who would end up the winner. The Chefs used their brute strength to send the balls flying to the field, letting 3 of their players stand on each base. However, this came at cost. They had 2 outs. One more, and they would lose the game entirely. They needed a miracle home run to convert those 3 players into points on the board. In such a crucial do-or-die situation, the Cleaving Chefs finally sent in their trump card. Michael slowly walked towards the field, with the hobmankeys and the dwarves cheering in excitement as the 2 best players finally faced off in the final minutes of the game. Continue your journey with Empire. Kong was on the mound, his eyes burning in competitiveness as he finally got the chance to try and strike out his boss. Ever since Michael showed them this game, none of the hobmankeys had ever won a game off of him. But Kong had prepared for this moment. This was his chance to show off his hard work. Michael, on the other hand, welcomed Kong's intense stare down with a simple shrug of the shoulders, showing his relaxed attitude even in the tensest of situations. Finally, Kong threw his first ball, sending it straight down the middle of the catcher's mitt. This was perhaps the fastest pitch in the game, making the crowd erupt in excitement and hype. Michael let the first pitch go without swinging, meaning that it was his first strike. He just smiled and nodded in respect at Kong's improved skill. Then, on the second pitch, the ball seemed to be as fast as the first one, making the crowd think Kong pitched the same ball as before. Yet, when the ball was about to reach the mitt, it dramatically curved downwards and landed perfectly on the catcher's mitt. Michael let this ball go as well, making it his second strike. He just had one more chance. The whole crowd was silent. They were on the edge of their seats. The dwarves all stood up and stared at the game with bated breaths. The tension was palpable. This last pitch would decide it all. Kong took a deep breath and wound up his shoulders before sending the last ball flying towards the plate. Just when everyone thought it was over, Michael finally twisted his shoulders, brining the bat speeding towards the incoming ball. And as the ball got closer, it curved to the left. But Michael seemed to have predicted this and moved his bat accordingly, hitting the ball high up in the air and out onto the field. Everything seemed to have turned into slow motion. The crowd watched as the ball flew into the air and curved down towards the middle section of the bleachers. The dwarves were stunned, not expecting the ball to fly towards their section. One brave dwarven child raised her hand, letting the ball fall perfectly in her hand. Then silence. The crowd of spectators and the players on the field all looked at the dwarven child holding the ball in her hands. I caught the home run ball," she screamed. And finally, everyone erupted in cheers, celebrating such a momentous occasion. The game was so close, with the Brainiac engineers looking to have finally clutched a win. Yet, at the very last moment, Michael was able to pull off a miracle home run that scored the Chefs 4 points, winning them the whole game. But the results of the game didn't matter for the crowd of Hobmankeys or the dwarves. They cheered at the sheer entertainment and excitement they felt throughout the whole game. The dwarves and the Hobmankeys celebrated together, jumping and hugging each other in celebration. Even the two sides of the bleachers finally broke their rivalry and celebrated together. Blue-uniformed fans hugged their red-uniformed rivals, applauding each other for such a good game. While they were celebrating, Thrain took a moment to himself and observed his surroundings. His fellow dwarves were shouting in excitement and showing smiles that almost made the braids on their beards open up. It was hard to believe that they experienced something calamitous only a few days ago. For a moment, they all forgot the sorrows of yesterday and let go of the anxieties of tomorrow. For now, they enjoyed the moment with everyone else. It hadn't even been a day, yet he was starting to love this village, this community. After the game, everyone took their celebrations to the village plaza, where food and drinks were shared all around. Michael took to the stage and unveiled one of his current projects that he had been working on. "Sorry, kids, but this one is just for adults," he said as he used his magic to bring multiple barrels to the plaza, each one with a tap on the bottom. "This is called beer, and it is best enjoyed cold." Michael had been in this medieval world for 10 years, yet he had never seen a single beer in his life. As it turned out, beer hadn't yet been invented in this place at all, which was very surprising. When he found this out, he quickly decided to produce his own beer. Luckily, one of the crops that grew on the farms was barley, which meant he had an ample amount of ingredients to make beer. And so he did. When the dwarves came here, he found it fitting to finally announce this new product to the village. The adult Hobmankeys all sniffed the rich aroma of the beer and couldn't help but be interested in this strange drink. As for the dwarves, they immediately felt inclined to try out this new alcoholic drink. They were, of course, famed for their big belly full of ale and alcohol. So, they were the first ones to try out this new product. Michael opened one of the barrel taps and poured a drink into the wooden cup in his hands. Then, he presented it to Thrain and the rest of the dwarves, who eyed the beer with curiosity and a little bit of scrutiny. They had refined tastes. No normal alcohol would make them satisfied, much less this strange new yellowish drink that foamed at the top. "Michael, I must warn you that we might not like this beer of yours. If so, then please do not take it as a slight against you. Our tongues are merely more suited to ale or other types of alcohol, Thrain said, completely confident that he wouldn't like this beer. Michael may beat them in terms of technical and mechanical advancements, but Thrain's dwarven pride couldn't back down at Michael's attempt to make alcohol. Just try it out, Michael said, chuckling to himself. Thrain carefully took the wooden cup offered to him and noticed that it was very cold to the touch. Cold alcohol? Strange, Thrain muttered to himself. Alcohol was famed for its ability to warm up the body, so it was incredibly strange for it to be as cold as the winter ice. Thrain sniffed at the beer before finally taking a small sip from the cup. The rest of the dwarves all looked at Thrain's expression, curious as to how this new beer compared to the best Alesh and alcohols that the Dwarven Kingdom could offer. At the very first sip, Thrain took the cup out of his mouth and wiped the foam off from his beard and mustache. His eyes widened as he observed the beer with intense scrutiny. The dwarves thought his expression was indicative of the beer's bad taste. How is it, friend? It tastes bland, does it not? Surely. After all, ale is the superior alcoholic drink. Give here, Thrain. I will see for myself how bad this beer tastes like. But just as the dwarf was about to take the beer away from Thrain's hands, he suddenly shoved it away and gulped the whole cup in one go, surprising the rest of the dwarves. Oh! A satisfied sigh released out of Thrain's mouth, his beard still stained with beer foam. This is the nectar of the gods, he proclaimed. Michael, this beer is like sugar to my taste buds. It's not as alcoholic as ale, but it is all the better for it. Its cold temperature also makes it so much better to drink. It's as if I've been thirsty this whole time, and I simply did not know it. Only when I drank this beer did I finally feel refreshed. Its coldness soothes my soul. Thrain's relentless praise for the beer led the other dwarves to feel as if they had to drink the beer. Read exclusive content at Empire. Michael, can you please pour me one? I shall be the first one to drink. I want to know what it tastes like. I refuse to believe it's better than ale before I drink it myself. Michael had to assure the dwarves that there were plenty for everyone. He poured everyone their own cups of beer. Drink all that you want, he said. Tonight is a celebration. The dwarves began drinking the cold beer, and just like Thrain, their eyes widened as they finally realized why Thrain had praised this alcoholic drink to the high heavens. Oh, by my beard, this shall be my new water. I could drink the whole barrel for myself. Why hasn't our dwarven kingdom ever invented such a drink? The dwarves filled themselves with alcohol, their cheeks slowly becoming redder and redder. However, Thrain noticed that they were the only ones getting drunk. The hobmankeys only looked at the beer with curious looks, but weren't courageous enough to take a sip for themselves. What are you all waiting for? He asked them. It's not as alcoholic as ale, so you can drink as much as you want. Their awkward silence made Thrain realize the problem. You guys haven't drunk any alcohol in your lives, haven't you? The rest of the dwarves stopped their merry drinking and looked at the hobmankeys with pure disbelief painted on their faces. This was akin to blasphemy. As regular mankeys, they had trouble finding simple water. They couldn't afford to buy alcohol, even if it was available in the desert wasteland. This is unacceptable, Thrain said, walking over to Kong and offering him his drink. You have a good mind, but sometimes this leads you to overthink. It's why I think you lost in the baseball match. It is better to let go of all your inhibitions. Drink. The rest of the dwarves also poured beer on cups and offered them to the hobmankeys who were a little bit hesitant to drink. You taught us how to play baseball. This time, we will teach you how to drink alcohol. Surprisingly enough, the first hobmankey to take a drink was Lolo, the oldest hobmankey in the village. He was just going to take a sip to try it out, but as the cold beer washed over his body, Lolo couldn't help but finish the whole bottle. He said in excitement. That's good. The dwarves couldn't help but laugh, knowing that Lolo's reaction to his first alcoholic drink was relatable. Soon, the rest of the hobmankeys started drinking beer with the dwarves, with the celebration at the plaza becoming more and more lively and soon becoming a party. The celebrations continued, with the dwarves teaching the hobmankeys everything they knew about drinking alcohol. Laughter and slurred speeches resounded through the town plaza, even deep into the night. Thrain and Lolo became quite competitive about drinking and competed in a game on who could finish a cup of beer the fastest. Even Fudge, who usually stayed in Michael's shadow, couldn't help but join in on the festivities. He ended up becoming quite the mascot for the village, with him showing everyone his ninja moves, which was quite contrary to what a real ninja should do. The dwarves joined in too, making fun of themselves by braiding their beards in odd and strange ways. One even made Michael's likeness onto the beard, which everyone enjoyed quite well. Kong and the other hobmankeys felt themselves becoming closer to the dwarves on a deeper level. They began talking about their lives before this, and how everything seemed hopeless and lost. Then, everything changed when they met Michael. Both dwarves and the hobmankeys understood each other on that end. So many dwarves and hobmankeys continued to drink beer that all the barrels Michael prepared were dried to the last drop. The hobmankeys, due to their stronger constitution from evolving into a higher species, found themselves able to compete against the dwarves in a drinking game. But of course, the dwarves still drank them under the table. Enjoy more content from Empire. By the end of the night, the only ones still awake were Michael, who refrained from drinking, and Thrain, who proved to be the one with the strongest stomach. This beer, Michael, it's quite something else. Even the royal dwarves with the most refined tastes would find themselves taking a liking to this cold beverage. And it's not just this beer, Michael. Everything you have made in this desolate land is something that will capture the hearts of dwarves and even other creatures, I'm sure. Your plumbing system, your electricity, this beer, the game of baseball, and most of all the atmosphere and feel of this village. I'm sure that everyone would want to experience this in their life. Us too. If it was possible, then we would want to live in this place forever. Michael looked at Thrain and saw the pained expression on his face. What do you mean? Why can't you stay here in our village? Thrain sighed and looked up at the stars. It is not that simple, Michael. Even though we are on the outskirts of the Dwarven Kingdom, we are still part of it nonetheless. We cannot simply leave our responsibilities to our kind. What responsibilities? Michael asked. Our village is the very first defensive line of the kingdom. Now that it is destroyed, then it is our responsibility to build it back up. So, once time has passed and a landslide poses no more problem for us, then we will have to return to our village to rebuild it by hand, Thrain explained. This was a hard decision for Thrain. Even though they had only been in this village for a day, they found themselves deeply attracted to its culture and lifestyle. It was extremely hard to part ways with this village now that they discovered how amazing it was. But they pledged an oath to the kingdom itself. Betraying it would be tantamount to ripping out their own heart. Michael thought for a second and found a solution. What if we build a defensive line in place of the village? He said. What do you mean? You said that your village is the first line of defense for the kingdom, right? What if we build a wall instead? It would serve a defensive purpose for the kingdom, which means that you won't betray your oath and still live here permanently. Thrain thought Michael was simply offering a thoughtless solution, but the sincerity in his eyes told him otherwise. Michael was serious. We appreciate your kindness, but we can't let you and this village bear that burden. Creating that defensive wall would take months upon months of hard work. Not to mention the distance between this village and the Dwarven Kingdom. It simply isn't possible. Michael chuckled, almost offended that Thrain would think that such a simple job would take more than a few days' worth of work. Please, you underestimate our construction prowess. Isn't that right, Kong? The inebriated Kong slowly got up from under the table and nodded his head. A simple wall? That would take 4 days, max. Kong bragged. We have about 20 construction hobmankeys available for this project, said Lolo, wiping the foam out of his mouth. But for such a simple project, I doubt we'd need more than 10. Thrain looked at the three of them and couldn't believe what they were saying. A defensive wall taking less than 4 days? That was absurd. Even the best and fastest craftsmen in the Dwarven Kingdom would need a month at least. I appreciate your gesture, but I do not think it is possible, at least not at the level that we dwarves consider acceptable. Thrain thought that Michael and the others would create a simple wooden wall. After all, that was the only thing they could create in 4 days. To convince him, Michael pointed at the floor underneath their feet. Thrain, do you think the ground is sturdy enough to be considered a good wall? He asked. Thrain looked at the floor and tested its durability with a single stomp of his foot. After hearing the dull sound it produced, he knew that this ground could indeed make for a great wall. "But this is made out of stone, is it not?" asked Thrain. "I doubt you could carve out a stone wall within a month, much less 4 days, as you said." Michael smiled smugly. "Kong, tell him." Kong cleared his throat and said, "Only 1 day. This ground used to be made out of mud and soil, but we were able to make it like this within 1 day." Thrain got up from his seat, with the shock immediately turning him sober. The next day, Thrain woke up with a splitting headache. He could hardly believe what he heard yesterday. If he wasn't as clear-headed as he was now, then he would have thought that he dreamed the whole conversation he had with Michael and the others. Making a stone wall in a matter of a few days? Thrain knew this was impossible. Yet, Michael was sure that they could do it. So sure, in fact, that they invited him and the other dwarves to witness the creation of concrete with their own eyes. As the sun slowly rose in the air, the dwarves all gathered near the outskirts of the village, where everything was still under construction. As more and more mankeys found their way to this village, they had to constantly expand their territory to accommodate the 500,000 hobmankeys living in their village. Michael, Kong, Lolo, and the rest of the engineer hobmankeys gathered at the boundary between concrete flooring and the natural soil flooring of the parched lands. There were metal rods inserted on the next part of the land they were going to turn into concrete flooring, making it much more stabler. There was a strange metal contraption in the middle of the construction zone, with its shape like a barrel with its top open, and, through electricity, it was constantly rotating at a fixed speed. "Is the concrete inside that metal?" Thrain asked. Michael nodded his head. "What is that for?" "Is that needed for the process?" the dwarves asked. "No," Kong answered. "As taught to us by our boss, we need to constantly move the concrete, or else it will harden too fast." Thrain and the dwarves showed a look of disbelief and doubt. Concrete dried so fast that they need that contraption to keep it in a liquid state? It sounded absurd. "If you have any questions, you can just ask me. Kong and the others will start the construction," Michael said, signaling for them to start the demonstration. Upon Michael's instruction, the engineers began their work. They began pouring the concrete mixture onto its designated dent on the ground. Kong used his skill, which allowed him to project a visual image of the plan into reality. A finished project overlaid onto the empty space, allowing the workers to implement the design much easier than before. With the combination of a few other skills from the engineers, they were able to pour the concrete on the ground and create a very flat surface, with designs and flourishes that represented the village's customs the best. The dwarves watched on, unable to even utter a word, as the hobmankeys worked with speed and efficiency they had never seen before. They didn't even have to talk to know what each other's work was supposed to be. They just knew it intuitively. Explore more adventures at Empire. After an hour, this section of the village finally had concrete flooring. They just needed to construct houses next, and they could be inhabited by other hobmankeys. How are they working so fast? And their magic, it perfectly fits their job so well. This kind of fine craft would take at least more than a day for a dwarven craftsman to replicate. I can see now how they are confident in their speed of construction. Thrain approached Michael and admitted his mistake. "You are right, Michael. The speed in which you create these roads is unprecedented," he said genuinely. Michael shook his head. "The real magic hasn't even started yet. Now it's time for the concrete to set and dry." Thrain looked at Michael, a bit confused. "What do you mean? That would take a long time, no?" For what he could see, the concrete was still wet and malleable. From his estimation, it would take at least a day for it to completely harden, which was still very impressive. "No, we don't have to wait that long," Michael said. "A little spell is all we need." He raised his hand, with the elemental mana flowing around his body. His supreme skill, mana gathering, allowed him to see the individual chemical reactions taking place inside the very concrete itself. Using a simple spell, Michael manipulated the mana in his surroundings to slowly harden the concrete in the ground. After a few seconds, it was done. Michael walked to the newly set ground and found himself on solid footing. He stomped, feeling the ground resist the force with a degree of hardness that satisfied his standards. "It's done," he said to Thrain. Thrain, partly believing and disbelieving what happened, slowly walked towards Michael before his boots stepped foot onto the concrete ground. He half expected his foot to set an indent on the concrete, but it didn't. It was as hard as stone. Finally, he put his entire body weight on the concrete. "It's true," he muttered to himself. In just one day, no, in just a few hours, they were able to make something even harder than stone. The other dwarves couldn't rein in their curiosities and stepped onto the concrete as well. Finally, they believed Michael's claims of creating a wall in a matter of a few days. It was no exaggeration and was probably even a conservative estimate. They could probably create the wall in less than 2 days. They couldn't believe it. This material called concrete completely transformed everything they knew about construction. With this concrete, the entire Dwarven kingdom could recover from the aftermath of a landslide in less than a month. Thrain faced Michael with a pleading expression. "Help us construct the wall," he said. Michael smiled. That was no question. A group of 10 Hobmanki engineers readied themselves for the journey back to the Dwarven kingdom. Michael, Thrain, and a few other dwarves accompanied them on a separate wagon. Behind them were a couple more automobiles, each carrying a large stock of concrete for the job. After a few days of traveling, they finally reached the remnants of Thrain's village. It was still devastated by the landslide, but at least the muddy water had subsided for now. Michael floated above the entire territory, surveying everything in his surroundings. Below him were his engineers and the dwarves. Finally, he nodded. "Let's start." The construction progressed quite easily, with the dwarves and the Hobmankis working together to clean up all the debris and wreckage in the area. By the time they were finished, the whole place was nothing more than a bald spot in the middle of the forest. Thrain and the dwarves felt a little bit sentimental once they saw the empty plot of land that they once called home. But it was gone now. They couldn't take it back. Finally, they began the construction of a wall that would be more than 10 meters tall and spanned from one side of the mountain to the other. Their village was located in a deep valley, making it a critical spot for the Dwarven kingdom's defenses. Many intruders would find it easy to infiltrate the rest of the kingdom once they bypassed the destroyed village. But with this wall, they would cut off any attempts from the intruders. If they wanted to get through to the kingdom, they would have to go through the treacherous terrain of the mountains. By constructing this wall, Thrain and the villagers would fulfill their responsibility to the kingdom, which would give them the freedom to stay in Michael's village for the foreseeable future. They prepared enough concrete for the project, with everything being stored on a concrete mixer installed on the back of the automobiles. With Michael supervising everything in the project, everything went as smoothly as they planned. By the end of the second day, they were able to create a 10-meter wall that would prevent an army from easily passing through the Dwarven kingdom. Thrain and the dwarves were officially free from their oath. Meanwhile, further inside the Dwarven kingdom, a few dwarves were making the journey out to try and find refuge in the unknown. Just like Thrain's village, these dwarves also lost their homes to the devastating landslide that affected almost half of the Dwarven kingdom. Because of that, famine and homelessness spread around the entire Dwarven community. The capital, where the Dwarven king resided, experienced an overpopulation that caused a lot of chaos in the kingdom. These dwarves didn't want to further exacerbate the problems in the capital, so they decided to venture outwards to find their own temporary refuge. Although they wanted to rebuild their village, their forges and their smithing materials were all destroyed in the landslide. And even if they had their proper materials, they would all be forced to work on restoring the kingdom's walls first and foremost before they could restore their village. With no choice left, all the men decided to search for a better place outside their kingdom. This group of dwarves knew that there was still another village on the very outskirts of the kingdom, so they visited it in an attempt to make contact with their village for cooperation. But instead of seeing the remnants of a destroyed village, this group of dwarves saw nothing but an empty space in the middle of the valley. There was no debris and no destruction scattered about, as if the landslide hadn't affected it in the first place. "Did the Dwarven king order for this village to be cleaned?" asked one of the dwarves. "No, He's too busy dealing with the capital. And last I heard, he's allocating all workers to rebuild the wall. They don't have enough workers to clean up this village, answered another dwarf. A different dwarf from the back of the group couldn't believe his eyes as well. This doesn't make sense, he said in disbelief. I visited this place 2 days ago, and it was still full of mud and debris. The rest of the dwarves didn't believe his words. Where did you get enough ale to mess up your brain this much? There's no way it's possible to clean up all that mess in 2 days, said one dwarf. No, it's true. I was there with him, and it is as he says. There were even remnants of the village still left standing. But now everything's gone. After hearing another dwarf recount what he saw, the rest of them began to get suspicious. Slowly, they walked forward to see what became of the village that used to be on the very outskirts of their kingdom. As they got closer, they finally saw it, a 10-meter-tall wall with a grainy white color, standing grandly between the two mountains by their side. They couldn't believe their eyes. Not only was the entire landslide wiped off the entire plot of land, but a giant wall suddenly spawned out of nowhere as well. Their minds immediately tried to reason this through supernatural means, like a god of dwarves descending into the lands and constructing this wall as a form of pity for them. After all, no human, dwarf, or creature could create this grand structure in a matter of less than 2 days. That would be absurd. Just then, one of the dwarves caught sight of a simple wooden house near the wall. Judging from the campfire lit up by its side, they knew that the cabin was occupied. Explore stories on Empire. They slowly approached it until they saw a single dwarf cooking meat on the campfire and drinking some sort of beverage in a cup. As they approached, most of them recognized the lone dwarf. Thrain, is that you? One of them asked. Thrain welcomed the group into his cabin, as if he had been expecting them for quite some time. Yes, it's me. Come in and make yourselves comfortable, Thrain said. The dwarves all entered his cabin and couldn't help but question him immediately about what happened to their village. Enlighten us as to what is going on. Why is your village gone without a trace? What happened to the others? Where did that stone wall come from? They asked Thrain. In response, Thrain smiled and carefully explained everything that happened to him. How he met Michael and how the human invited them all to his village in the parched lands. He was forthcoming with them, telling them nothing but the truth. After all, the very reason why he stayed behind in the first place was exactly for this encounter. He wanted to invite more dwarves to live in Michael's village. Is there really such a place like that? It sounds too good to be true. And you mean to say that they made that big wall in just under 2 days? Impossible. Are you of sound mind, Thrain? Are you sure that the tragedy of this landslide hasn't damaged your mental faculties? Of course, the dwarves couldn't believe Thrain's description of Michael's village in the parched lands. This paradise sounded more like a dream than something that happened in reality. If that is true, brothers, then you too must be imagining the wall built upon this village. Everything I said is even truer than the fact that we dwarves have ale in our blood. Thrain affirmed. Stay tuned for updates on Empire. The dwarves, although skeptical, decided to believe Thrain's words for now and check out this magical paradise for themselves. If it was only a product of Thrain's imagination, then they would try to help him recover from his delusion. Take us to this oasis in the desert, the dwarves said, to which Thrain nodded with satisfaction. He was 100% sure that they would soon get enamored with the village's customs and culture once they saw it for themselves. Truthfully, Thrain was starting to get guilty after experiencing happiness in the village. He knew that there were still a lot more unfortunate dwarves affected by the landslide who had no food or hammer to their name. It sounded unfair that they were the only ones to experience such little joys in life like beer and baseball. We must make our way towards the parched lands immediately, for it will take more than a month's worth of travel, said the dwarves. But Thrain knew that there was a better and much faster way of getting to the village. He looked down at the shadow on his feet and mumbled the words, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Suddenly, a bulbous figure made out of violet slime emerged out of his shadow, taking the form of Michael's trusty old pet, Fudge. You rang for me, Thrain-san? Asked Fudge. Yes, Fudge Dono. Because Fudge was influenced by a lot of anime tropes, He always insisted that he be addressed as Fudge Dono or Fudgecoin. Thrain respected the slime, so he accommodated his requests consistently. "We are going to need the automobiles to take us to the village," Thrain said, introducing the other dwarves to Fudge. "Okay, I'll be sending them now." And just like Fudge said, the automobiles arrived at the other side of the wall in just a few hours. The dwarves, just like Thrain when he first saw it, expressed their shock when the story about the horseless carriage turned out to be true. "You should hold off on your surprises until after you see what the village has to offer," Thrain said to the speechless dwarves. He assisted them into the automobile, but he didn't go with them. Instead, Thrain decided to stay near the walls so that he would be able to spread the news about the village to other dwarves. Once they arrived at the village, the dwarves were quickly welcomed by the almost native dwarves of the village. First of all, they were given their own houses to sleep in temporarily, which were equipped with both a plumbing system and electrical wiring. Then once they were settled in, the new dwarves were brought up to speed with everything there was to see in the village, including the farms, the accommodations, the public hot springs, and most importantly, the baseball fields where some of the dwarves were playing with the hobmankeys. The dwarves, of course, had also made a baseball team of their own called the Dwarven Miners, and quickly proved themselves to be one of the best teams in the entire village. Their short stature allowed them to have a smaller strike zone, meaning pitchers would always have trouble with their balls. "Oh, good. New recruits," said the dwarf team captain. "Come and warm up with us. We need to beat the chefs this time around." After a day of the dwarves immersing themselves into the culture of the village, they quickly understood why Thrain said that this was one of the best places to live in among the entire world. Everything in this village was free, including housing, water, electricity, food, and everything else they needed to survive. This meant that they could fully enjoy what life had to offer without worrying about where they were going to find their next meal. The best part was that everyone worked together to keep this village into the paradise it was now. Each of them, including the dwarves that made this village their home, contributed something to the table. Whether it was smithing, crafting, or maybe even brewing beer, everyone had a job to do. One of the dwarves even had the brilliant idea of constructing a tavern for everyone to drink in when the night came. With Michael's approval, the dwarf enlisted the help of Kong and a few others to make the tavern's design a mix of both cultures, while still maintaining a little bit of dwarven design. This tavern became the place where all of them gathered at night, drinking while making fun of each other's bad game during the baseball matches. I know my parents would strike me down for this, but I think beer tastes better than ale. After tasting this cold beer, I just might agree with you. This is the life. Playing baseball and kicking it back with a couple of cold ones, said one particular dwarf, whose beard wasn't as bushy as the others. "You're not the one to say that, Baldric. Even though you've been here for 2 days now, you still don't have anything to contribute to this village," teased his dwarf friend, to which a lot of dwarves and hobmankeys chuckled to themselves after hearing. "I'm trying to find something I'm good at," Baldric tried to explain, "but I have no other talent except drinking this beer." Just then, one of the dwarves had an idea form in his head. What if you become the one to sell this beer to the Dwarven Kingdom? Baldric immediately stood up, almost knocking over the table and spilling all the drinks. "You're right. This beer will definitely become popular within our kingdom. If I sell this beer to all the drinkers I know, then I can bring in a lot of money for this village." The dwarf didn't waste any more time and immediately visited Michael's house in the middle of the night. Thankfully, Michael was still awake as he was busy with a project of his. He welcomed the dwarf and listened to his proposal. You want to sell beer to the Dwarven Kingdom? I thought that all forms of outside business are forbidden." Michael asked. It was a widely known fact that the Dwarven Kingdom refused any peddlers to enter their kingdom. And as far as he knew, even the great Eyes Vanderbilt was unable to break through that restriction. "Yes, sir, but there are always exceptions. There's a black market where illegal goods are traded within the kingdom, where dwarves sell products from outside the kingdom," Baldric explained. Michael thought about it for a second. "Are you sure you can do this?" Baldric struck his chest in pride. "I know everything there is to know about the black market, sir. I've frequented it a lot of times in search of good ale, like most dwarves." and I'm sure that beer will easily sell within that community. Michael thought this was a good idea. He had been thinking of a way for the Reborn company to spread to the Dwarven Kingdom this whole time. However, it was hard because Castell was a human and would be denied entry before she could even get close. But with an inside man like Baldric, they wouldn't have to worry about infiltration. They would be able to sell beer to the Dwarven Kingdom and open the doors for even more Reborn products to be sold there. "I like this idea of yours," Michael complimented him. "I want you to coordinate with Castell and Lolo about this. Castell will help you with purchasing the materials needed to package the beer into a glass bottle that's easy to transport. We will need to make more barley for the beer, so we need Anne's help to expand the barley farms. Lolo will know the right workers who will help with creating the beer, packaging it, and transporting it to the kingdom. After the beer enters the kingdom, you will be the one in charge of selling it. If you need the other dwarves to help you, then you can ask for their help." Baldric was starting to get excited at the prospect of selling beer to the Dwarven Kingdom. This was the first time he was given such a large responsibility, but Michael trusted him with it without even doubting his ability. He saluted Michael. "I will make this successful, sir." And just as Baldric was about to leave the room, he suddenly remembered something. "Oh, right, sir. What would you want to exchange the beer for?" he asked. "Experience more on Empire." Michael was a little bit confused with the question. "Doesn't the Dwarven Kingdom use gold coins as their currency as well?" "Yes, sir. But the black market works a little bit differently. Most of the things sold, there are products from the outside world. So, the dwarves opt to sell it through bartering instead of gold coins. Some of them sell it for gems, trinkets, weapons, or even stonework. But what's most popular in the black market is something that everyone in the world seeks to obtain. For example, Elven ale is mostly exchanged for a metal called Damascus, which can only be produced by us dwarves. This makes Damascus steel extremely valuable to the outside world, which dwarves sell for a lot of gold to other civilizations. This is the reason why a lot of dwarves make their living through the black market," Baldric explained. "Damascus?" Michael asked, intrigued at this new material. "This metal is a specialty for us dwarves," Baldric said, with a bit of his dwarven pride leaking out of his voice. "It is the most durable material on the planet while being even more lightweight than steel or iron. It has a lot of properties as well that make it one of the most sought-after materials in the world." Michael's brain began to work as he imagined all of his inventions becoming reinforced with Damascus steel. If Damascus steel was as good as Baldric said it was, then he could finally create a lot of new inventions that he wouldn't have otherwise been able to create. "Get all the Damascus steel you can bargain for," Michael told Baldric. Getting Damascus steel in exchange for beer was the best deal he could make in this situation. That steel was even more valuable than gold coins, since he could earn as much as he wanted from selling Reborn products in the entire world, but he would only get Damascus from the Dwarven Kingdom. And he could always sell Damascus steel as a Reborn product as well. "You got it, sir. I'll make sure to barter for the most Damascus steel I can get." More days passed, and even more batches of dwarves made their way to the village. Thrain became sort of a recruiter in the Dwarven Kingdom, spreading the word to all affected villagers that there was a safe haven in the parched lands. Most of them lost their entire livelihood in the landslide, so they were desperate enough to take the chance. Slowly, the population of the village grew to even greater heights, expanding further outwards. Meanwhile, Baldric and the Hobmankeys worked tirelessly as they began the production of beer, which was now renamed Reborn beer. Michael had to create more and more automobiles for transport. Each could carry hundreds of crates of beer. Finally, the first shipment of beer departed from the village and made its way to the Dwarven Kingdom. After a few days, they finally arrived in the Dwarven Kingdom at an undisclosed cave hidden in the mountains. This was where the black market operated. Baldric entered the cave and saw the bustling market inside. Dwarves were shouting at customers to try and entice them to buy a new product from the outside world. This made the place extremely noisy. But contrary to their tactics, Baldric simply just set up a table and took out a cold bottle of beer. Then, he just drank and enjoyed beer silently. After a few seconds, somebody took the bait. "Brother, what is it you're drinking right there?" A passerby dwarf asked, unable to hide his curiosity. "Oh, this," Baldric said as sloshed the liquid in his cup. "This is called beer. Would you care to try it?" The curious dwarf took the first sip of beer, and the rest was history. His excited shout and relieved exhale upon drinking this mysterious cold beverage garnered a couple more curious dwarves to approach Baldric's table. Of course, Baldric didn't hesitate to give them a free taste of beer. And as expected, those dwarves immediately became enamored with the refreshing taste of the alcoholic drink. Since these dwarves were used to much more potent drinks like ale, they all treated beer as if it were water in a desert. This made them extremely prone to becoming addicted to beer. They wanted to drown themselves in it, clamoring for Baldric to give them another bottle. "Brother, this Reborn beer is amazing. I'll give you a full crate of pure steel for a crate of this beer." "Me too, brother. I'm willing to part ways with a handful of full clarity gems for 10 crates of Reborn beer." As they shouted their requests, this drew more and more dwarves in to look at all the commotion happening at Baldric's table. At this point, he was the only vendor in the black market where his customers were the ones shouting to buy his products. All the other dwarves shouted at the customers just to get their attention on what they were selling. But not Baldric. The customers were the ones doing all the marketing for him. It was like a virus that spread among the dwarves. Each of them was lured in by curiosity, and Baldric satisfied it by giving them all a free taste of beer. And once they got a taste of this cold beer down their throats, they too got caught up in the frenzy to buy as much beer as they could. This type of tactic was taught by Michael. He suggested to Baldric to give his customers a free bottle of beer, which might seem too much, but it worked in getting the dwarves to buy a whole crate for themselves. "I'll buy your whole stock," said one dwarf. "That's unfair. I'm fine if I just get 100 crates of bottles for myself." "Hey, I got here first. If anything, I should be the first one to buy out the whole booth." The dwarves were in uproar, bargaining higher and higher prices for the beer without even Baldric saying anything about its price. "Brothers," Baldric finally spoke up, "we are willing to trade beer for any metal or precious trinkets that you can offer. However, we are prioritizing deals that are made in one currency, Damascus steel." Upon saying those words, the dwarves went silent. "I have it. I can give you a kilo for each crate." "Me too. I can give you 100 kilos of Damascus steel right now." "Wait, can I reserve crates for myself? I have a lot of Damascus steel in stock, but it's on my forge." Baldric smiled as he saw this. Finally, the Reborn beer was in business. In a matter of a few hours, Baldric's entire stock was cleaned out by various buyers. Michael had him implement a 10-crate limit for each dwarf, meaning they couldn't buy in bulk and let the other dwarves have a chance to buy it for themselves. Michael knew that the spread of Reborn beer hinged on word of mouth. If only a small number of dwarves had their hands on Reborn beer, it wouldn't spread quite as fast as they wanted it to. And just as Michael predicted, the first night after Reborn beer was sold in the black market, the taverns began stocking their shelves with this new product. "Say, good brother, what is that new product you have there? That doesn't look like ale," a dwarf asked, leaning over the table to point at the conspicuous bottle of beer displayed among the best Alash in their stock. One of his friends turned to look at the bottle and recognized the name stamped on the front. "Wait a minute, Reborn beer? I think I've heard that before. What is it?" "I heard that this alcohol is making waves all over the dwarven community. It's a hot topic right now. I've heard that even royals want a piece for themselves." The dwarf, upon hearing this, couldn't help but want to satisfy his curiosity. "If even those picky dwarves like it, then I want to see what it tastes like." The dwarf bought the bottle, took a sip, and was addicted in one go. "Bartender, what can I get more of this beer? This is a revelation." The bartender dwarf looked suspiciously around him, as if he didn't want others to hear his next words. "Rumor is," the bartender whispered, "you can get all the beer you want if you travel to the parched lands and seek out the paradise within it. That's not all. I heard there's experience more content on Empire." The dwarves listening to the bartender's story couldn't help but gasp at the insane stories about this supposed village in the middle of the desert. "I've only heard about this because I have a friend who went to the village himself, and after he returned here, he praised it to no end. He's not even the first eyewitness to come forward with commendations for this village, the bartender added. The dwarven friend group all looked at each other, with their eyes showing their intent to visit this magical place. And so, that was how Reborn got slowly filled with more and more dwarves either permanently moving to the village or just visiting it for a good time. Meanwhile, Baldric finally returned to the village, with the automobiles filled with carts and carts of a mysterious silver and black metal called Damascus steel. This was perhaps the first time someone was able to smuggle this much Damascus steel out of the Dwarven Kingdom. And it all landed in the pockets of a 10-year-old child with a penchant for making strange inventions. "This is all the steel I've gathered, boss," Baldric said, presenting the Damascus to Michael. "Good. Thank you for your work." Michael complimented the dwarf. "Now, it's my turn to make good use of this." Michael always had a lot of projects in mind ever since he arrived in this desert. However, the lack of materials he had available always prevented him from bringing these ideas out into the real world. But now, he had Damascus steel, a material known for its strength, durability, and flexibility. According to the dwarven smiths he consulted, Damascus steel could be fashioned into an extremely thin or small piece without destroying its integrity. This was perfect for creating complex and intricate projects that could only be done in his previous life through large, complex machinery. For example, it would completely improve the current design of the automobile, allowing it to become a lot faster and more durable without adding a lot of weight to the vehicle. Not only that, but the main engine itself could finally be upgraded. Michael's current iteration of the engine was still bulky and unrefined compared to the automobiles he had in his previous life. But now, Damascus steel allowed him to finally reach the standards of modern cars, while also improving it by a tiny bit. After all, Damascus steel was a much better material than the metals they had in his previous world, meaning that he could even surpass those supercars in the future. Of course, it would take a little bit more time before that was possible. However, there was one thing he could achieve right now. He looked down at his shadow, communicating with his clone attached to Castell's shadow. "Castell, can you hear me?" Michael asked. "Yes, young master. I can hear you just fine," the shadow at his feet replied, vibrating to match the sound of Castell's voice. With the cloning ability he learned from Fudge, Michael was able to communicate with Castell even from a very long distance, replicating a radio or a telephone from his previous world. "There's been a change in plans. We've been making preparations for selling concrete, right?" "Yes," Castell replied. "The road connecting the parched lands and the Vanderbilt estate has finally been finished. This means that we can finally distribute concrete to the public market." Michael nodded. "But that's not all we're going to do. Young master, are you planning some kind of market-breaking scheme again?" Castell had known Michael for a long time, and even if she couldn't see his face, she knew that there was a playful yet devious smile on his face right now. "I want to start selling automobiles." Castell was so surprised that she almost fell out of her chair. "Really, young master? You're finally going to bring out the automobile to the general public?" She knew firsthand how revolutionary the automobile had been for their company alone. It was able to transport their inventory at the fastest pace, turning a month-long delivery into just 1 week. She could only imagine how much this would change the landscape of commerce in this country. She reckoned that there would be a lot of companies wanting to buy multiples for their businesses to boost sales by at least half. They would be able to sell this automobile at any price they wanted, even making it one of the most expensive pieces of craft in the world, and people would still buy it. This would entice both the professional and general public, making their everyday travel with an automobile instead of a carriage. "Young master, isn't it better if we wait a couple more months to a year before we sell the automobile? We should let the concrete become more widely used before we announce this new machine," Castell argued. But Michael knew that his way was better. "No, we need to sell the automobile and the concrete at the same time." And before he could even finish his sentence, Castell's skill, Golden Nose, made her realize the potential of this idea. "I see, young master. If we show off how easily concrete could be used to construct roads, then we can package the two of them together. They need to construct flat roads for the cars to truly show their worth. So they would want to buy both concrete and automobiles at the same time. She began to see the possibilities of this business and all the money that they would rake in. But perhaps the best thing they would earn was another newsworthy story about Reborn's new revolutionary invention. This would give them enough fame to break through to the Queen's region. I'll work on this project, young master. We'll have everything prepared by the time you finish the production of both products, Castell said, excitement spilling out of tone. Michael noticed her eagerness and had to calm her down. She was already overworked from her current workload. This would push her over the edge. This is a big job, and you're already handling a lot of stuff in the company. Don't worry, I'll be sending you some talented hobmankeys to help in the company. Michael found quite a few hobmankeys with talents and skills related to business. Although they weren't quite as good as Castell, they were still talented enough to be able to lift a lot of burden from her shoulders. Thank you, young master. I'll look forward to my recruits, she said, heaving a sigh of relief. Michael bid goodbye and cut off his communication with Castell. He needed to plan for the business venture, experience more tales on Empire. Concrete was easy to make, but automobiles were a completely different breed. Thankfully, there were currently a lot of dwarves in the village who specialized in metallurgy. He just had to ask them for help. Meanwhile, in the capital of the Dwarven Kingdom, located at the base of a volcanic mountain, the Dwarven King sat on his throne and massaged the creases on his forehead. What is the problem now? He asked his advisors. The meek dwarves kneeling on the red carpet looked up at their king and said, "There's been a suspiciously low amount of ale being purchased, sir." The king froze for a second and faced his advisors with a serious look. Dwarves are not purchasing ale? That is suspicious. They were known for having ale in their blood, so this news was cause for concern. Have you found out why? He asked. His advisors nodded their heads and signaled for a servant to bring out a single bottle of Reborn beer. From what we observed, the dwarves seemed to be addicted to this new beverage called beer, they explained. The king, curious as to how something could be better than ale, decided to pop the top open and drink it himself. And as soon as he did, his eyes widened and his pupils dilated. His reaction wasn't much different from any other dwarf that drank their first beer. He, too, fell in love at first sip. "This is good," exclaimed the Dwarven King. His advisors immediately spoke up, alarmed at his statement. "Sir, this is ruining the local ale market in our kingdom. This is an illegal good." The Dwarven King, realizing his mistake, awkwardly coughed and tried to backtrack his words. Right, this is an illegal good. That was what I meant to say. He wasn't supposed to like beer because he was the voice of the dwarven people. He was supposed to support only the products made by his fellow dwarves. That was how it has always been and always will be. He was supposed to have an intense hatred against the outside world and everything they produced. However, he couldn't help but look at the bottle in his hands with eyes of longing. Even now, all he could think about was getting another sip of this beer. "Are you sure this isn't a product of dwarves?" Gulp. "This is surely from the mind of a genius dwarf," the king said, casually taking another sip from the bottle. "By the way, is this all that you have confiscated? If you have more, give it here so that I can inspect it a couple more times, for scientific purposes, of course." His advisors looked at him with worry. It looked like their king himself was caught up in the beer fever spreading around their kingdom. The king waved off their concern. "Besides that, how is the overpopulation within our capital? Are there still a lot of refugees looking for a new home? Ever since the landslide, all the dwarves affected by it flocked to the capital of their kingdom, turning it overpopulated overnight. Explore more at Empire." Knowing that there were lives at stake, the king ordered his people to solve this problem immediately, turning rarely used forges into temporary homes for those dwarves. All this extra work became the reason why the work on walls was delayed for such a long time. He thought it was going well, but when he looked at his advisors, he saw their unsure faces. "Is it bad news or good news?" he asked them. His advisors looked at each other, not knowing if what they had was good news or not. "Your Highness, from what we could see, there's no longer an overpopulation problem within our capital. Is that not a good thing?" he asked, confused as to why they were not celebrating. "But sir, this is not due to our efforts. From what we have heard, the dwarves are all moving outside our kingdom, his advisors explained. "Have you found where they went?" The king asked, and his advisors nodded. "Yes, sire. They seem to have moved into a village in the parched lands." He sat back down on his throne and thought for a second. They moved there? Permanently? But what about their responsibility to the kingdom, to their fellow dwarves? They cannot let their positions unguarded for long. The villages surrounding the kingdom played an important role in their defense. Without them, it would be much easier for them to be sieged. But before his advisors could answer, the double doors to the throne room suddenly burst wide open as another dwarf, wearing the same royal attire as the king's advisors, hurried inside panting. "Your Highness, I have come with news." The king welcomed the dwarf in, letting him sit among his advisors. "What has caused you to be in such distress? Tell me." The dwarf steadied his breath before finally speaking. "I have come back after surveying the outskirts of our kingdom, as you commanded me, Your Highness. When I arrived there, I saw something impossible." The dwarf then took out a scroll from his pockets and presented it to his king. "This is a wall," the king muttered as he observed the sketch on the parchment paper. It showed an elaborate wall structure, 10 meters tall and sturdy enough to repel a cavalry. "That is right, Your Highness. When I traveled to the outskirts, I came across these thick and strong walls that had suddenly sprung up from where our villages were supposed to be. And that is not even the most surprising part. From what I have gathered, this wall seemed to have been built within just a few days, 2 days at the most." His words sent gasps throughout the throne room. They could hardly believe that such an elaborate wall structure could be built within just a few days. As craftsmen themselves, they knew the difficulties it would take to rush such a job, and from their estimates, this wall could only be constructed within a month. 2 days. That cannot be. Preposterous. There is no magical or physical way to create such an elaborate wall within just a few days. "How can you be sure that the walls were made within 2 days?" the king asked. "Your Highness, that wall wasn't there when I visited it 2 days ago. There are also a lot of dwarves who saw the construction themselves, swearing to their kidneys that the walls were indeed built within 2 nights using a strange new liquid material that hardened within a few hours." The king and his advisors were still skeptical about this story, but they knew that the dwarf was a man of his word. There wasn't any motive for him to lie, especially to the king. "Have you investigated who created these walls?" the advisors asked. "Yes. I happened upon one dwarf who lived alone near the outskirts named Thrain. He said that the walls are constructed so that the dwarves can leave the kingdom without having to betray their oath to protect it. Your Highness, it seems that the dwarves are permanently moving to a village in the parched lands, where food, water, housing, and beer are as free as the air we breathe today." Once he heard that, the dwarven king stood up from his throne and stared at the dwarf with serious intensity. "That village, it's where beer was made?" the king asked. The dwarf nodded meekly, thinking that he had done something wrong. "How dare they?" the king's voice thundered. "How dare they hog all the beer to themselves? I want it too." "Huh? Your Highness, did you say something else?" his advisors asked. The king ignored his advisor's query. "It is decided. I shall visit this village for myself and see what it has to offer that we cannot," the king said with a smile on his face, leaving his advisors to shake their heads in disappointment. Their king's intent was as clear as day. He just wanted to drink beer. Despite his advisors' pleas for him to change his mind, the dwarven king still went ahead with his plans to infiltrate the village. For safety reasons, he disguised himself through magic to seem like a normal dwarf. His taller stature slowly became shorter, his fiery eyebrows became tamer, and the intricate beard braid that covered half his face untangled itself to become free-flowing down to his knees. All the characteristics of his royal dwarven blood were gone, turning him into a normal, honest dwarf. Anyone who gazed at the dwarven king would feel as if he was just like any other. Case in point, the dwarven king approached a single wooden hut in the middle of the forest and knocked on Thrain's door. "Is anybody?" the dwarven king roared, but he quickly realized that his voice was too intimidating, so he had to change his tone. "Is anybody here?" Thrain came out of the cabin and welcomed the new dwarf. "Hello. Have you come to find paradise in the parched lands? What is your name? The Dwarven King coughed and thought of the first thing in his mind. My name is Byru, and yes, I seek the place where beer is plenty. Thrain laughed to himself. Byru was perhaps the 100th dwarf that came running to his cottage this week alone. The spread of beer within the kingdom opened the dwarves' eyes to Michael's village so much faster than even he could accommodate. You are lucky, Thrain said as he patted the Dwarven King's back with a smack. The automobile is just about to arrive. A couple of minutes later, a loud beep-beep resounded through the forest, signaling the automobile's arrival on the other side of the wall. Thrain escorted Byru to the wall, letting the Dwarven King set his eyes on the magnificent white concrete wall towering over the trees. Amazing, Byru commented. Thrain explained to him about this new material called concrete and how it was used to construct these sturdy walls within just a few days. By the way, are you from any villages on the outskirts of the kingdom? If so, then you can tell us so that we can build another wall in place of the destroyed settlement. Thrain asked, but Byru said there was no need. Finally, they caught sight of the automobile, surprising the Dwarven King. It was a square metal structure that had no horse, yet could run as fast as one. So this is the automobile. And strangely enough, the driver controlling this strange vehicle was a dwarf. Thrain, another recruit? The dwarf asked as he opened the door. Yup, thanks for picking him up. Thrain guided Byru to the automobile and returned to his post, waiting for the next batch of dwarves that needed help. The automobile began to drive, and the Dwarven King couldn't help but stare at the dwarf driving the automobile. He was astonished at how a dwarf was so integrated into the village's culture that he was the one driving this vehicle. Dwarves hated being away from their forges for too long, yet this one voluntarily did so. This is the only way I can contribute to the village, explained the dwarf. The Dwarven King heard that no one was forced to work in that village, yet everyone was working even harder than ever. It didn't make sense to him. He became so much more curious as to how the village operated to make the dwarves act like this. A couple of days later, Byru the Dwarven King finally arrived at the paradise in the parched lands. He could only stand in wonder at this strange civilization. Mankeys and dwarves alike walked around the streets with smiles on their faces, as if they were happy all the time in their lives. You must be the new dwarf. Welcome to our village, said a dwarf, wearing strange red clothes. Yes, my name is Byru, the Dwarven King said, holding out his hand for the other dwarf to shake. But instead, Byru felt a smack on his shoulders as the dwarf put his hands around him. Don't worry, I'll make sure you get acclimated with the village quickly. If this was back in the Dwarven Kingdom, the dwarf would have lost his hand for the crime of touching the king. But strangely enough, Byru didn't feel offended. This was the first time someone had actually come close to him without having any reservations, treating him like a normal dwarf. Your journey continues at Empire. First of all, let's go to the baseball field, the dwarf said. Baseball? What is this strange word? It's our game, the dwarf said, pulling on his shirt to show the words Dwarven Miners stitched on the front. Our team finally reached the finals. Byru had no choice as the dwarf forcefully dragged him through the streets. The Dwarven King watched as fellow dwarves and mankeys greeted them as they went past, either through a simple hello or a playful "we'll beat your team tonight." Dwarven and mankey children played on the streets without a care in the world. They passed through the plaza, where the smell of wonderfully cooked meat wafted through the air. There were stalls placed around the area, all of which served some kind of exotic food that everyone seemed to love. Finally, the dwarf dragged Byru to the baseball field, where a lot of dwarves were warming up for the game. On the way, the Dwarven King was told everything there was to know about baseball, including all the rivalries within the different teams in the village. It was evident from the dwarf that this was a big deal for them. Byru couldn't understand why the dwarves took this little game so seriously when there were other things they could be doing with their days. Hey guys, we have a new dwarf in our midst. Let's give a warm welcome, shall we? The dwarves, all wearing the baseball uniforms and safety gear that Michael made for them, looked at Byru and gave him their warmest welcomes. They immediately started to teach him about baseball, about how to properly hit a ball or pitch it. But Byru still couldn't understand why everyone liked baseball so much. "Why are you all acting so serious?" "Baseball sounds easy," said Byru. The dwarves froze and stared at Byru. For them, this was a sentence that could not be said lightly without having the skill to back it up. Their eyes showed a strange excitement, as if they had something special planned for the little newbie. Byru seemed to have forgotten that he wasn't a king, but a newcomer in this village. He had a lot to learn, and the dwarves were going to teach him, whether he wanted to or not. "What the forge?" The dwarven king collapsed on the ground, dead tired, as he crossed the final lap around the entire field. He was gasping for breath, but compared to the other dwarves who were still running more laps, they were barely even breathing loudly. A life-or-death situation for him was nothing but a warm-up for them. "Done already, newbie?" "Ha ha. Funny, talking about baseball is easy." "Well, now you know. We'll have to up your training regimen tomorrow. You can barely last one inning." The dwarves were ruthless in their treatment of Byru, letting him experience all the hardships that they regularly went through when they practiced for their games. Not only that, but Byru also became their shuttle, making him do all sorts of chores and fetch quests that completely wore down all the high and mighty attitude that Byru had for being the literal king of the dwarves. This was the first time he had to run from one end of the village to the other, with his hands full of baseball equipment. In other words, the king finally knew the hard work normal people went through in their day-to-day. By the end of the day, Byru was completely exhausted. His body was sore, his mind was tired, and he was just a second away from calling it quits and returning to his kingdom. But then the game started. At night, when the whole village was supposed to be asleep and covered in darkness, the entire baseball field was instead lit up by these bright lights that made it seem like they had harnessed the power of the sun. He heard the excited shouts and chanting in the bleachers, with every single one of them showing their enthusiasm for the game. "What are they shouting at?" Byru asked the dwarves. In response, they just smiled at him and patted his back with another resounding smack. "They're rooting for me, newbie." The captain of the dwarven miners dragged Byru out of their dugout and presented him to the crowd. The dwarven king looked around the bleachers and saw 1,000 mankeys and dwarves shouting and cheering with their whole chests, celebrating their entrance to the field. Everyone in the village gathered here, and all of them were cheering, not for him, but for the dwarves who showed great talent in baseball. He could see a few in the crowd who wore the same clothes and uniform as the ace player on their team, showing their reverence and applause to him by copying his attire. The dwarven king was astounded. There wasn't even this much adoration and cheering when he was crowned king during his coronation. He couldn't believe that a dwarf, who would have been considered normal in their kingdom, was being shown more admiration than a king. "Take this in, newbie," said the captain dwarf. "Once you experience this, you'll never get tired of it. So, if you want to be cheered like them, then you better show your talent in the field." Byru had no words for the captain. Unlike them, he couldn't even run through the 4 plates without getting exhausted. He couldn't even hit any ball with his bat, no matter how slow they threw it at him. He had no chance of becoming as great as their captain. We. Finally, the game started with the dwarven miners going against the farmer cultivators. Right from the get-go, the competition between the teams was fierce. The dwarves would score home runs after home runs, but the farmers would always come back against them through solid hits that earned them runs. The crowd was swayed easily by this competition, expressing their excitement or disappointment with cheering and shouting. This was the first time the Kings saw something so intense. It felt as if their lives were at stake with this game. When he first heard about baseball, he thought that it wasn't so serious. It was just a game after all. However, as he experienced everything with his own eyes, he could see the passion and dedication each team put onto the field. There were even a couple of times when the Dwarven King couldn't help but slap his knee in disappointment as the referee ruled the player as out as he touched the home base. As the game went on, the king found himself getting more and more invested in the game, cheering and sighing during crucial moments in the game. Finally, in the last inning of the game, the two teams were completely tied. The Dwarves had one last chance to break the tie and win the game completely. However, at the very last second, Their ace and captain, who scored almost half of their points for the team, suddenly had an accident and injured his knee. "Arg!" The captain groaned, grabbing his leg in pain. The team had to watch as their only hope of winning the game was carried out off the field. Find your next adventure on Empire. Byru felt the air in their dugout change. It was clear that they were completely devastated by this unfortunate incident. They were just one inning away from winning their first baseball title. The worst part was that they didn't have any other player in their roster who could replace their captain, except for one. The captain limped towards Byru and gently smacked his shoulders. "You can do it, newbie. You can win us the game," he said. But the Dwarven King was wholly unprepared for this. He was slowly dragged onto the field, bat in hand, clueless as to how he was going to win them the game. The world seemed to turn mute for him. He couldn't hear the cheering from the crowd. He couldn't even hear the shouting from his teammates, warning him that the first ball was about to brush past his body. Deciding to let go of all his worries and all his problems back in the Dwarven Kingdom, Byru decided to just swing the bat as hard as he could. And surprisingly, he felt a heavy force on his bat as the ball collided with it. The ball rose into the air and slowly fell to the outfield. Byru was so surprised that he forgot to run. He was only reminded when all of his teammates in the dugout motioned for him to run as fast as he could. And so he did. He ran to the limits of his physical body. Meanwhile, the ball bounced on the grass field before being picked up by a Hobmanki, who threw it towards first base, toward where Byru was running to. In a moment of desperation, the king dove toward the plate, never mind the dirt and mud that would sully his clothes. His hands reached out and touched the plate, almost at the same time that the defender caught the ball in his mitt. They both looked at the referee, who shouted, "Safe." Just then, all sounds returned to the king's ears. All he heard were crazed shoutings and cheering from the crowd, much more than when they were first introduced. His dwarf teammates all swarmed towards him, picking him up from the ground and patting the dirt off his uniform. "What are they shouting at?" he asked the dwarfs. His teammates smiled. "They're rooting for you, newbie. You won us the game." As it turned out, his one hit allowed the runner to reach home plate, scoring them 1 point that put them ahead of the other team. Byru was hoisted up by his teammates, tossing him high up in the air in celebration. At the end of the game, they all celebrated his game-winning hit at the tavern, where Hobmanki and Dwarf alike congratulated him for his crucial part in their win. The dwarves that were once so harsh to him had now finally warmed up to Byru. He had earned their respect, and the Dwarven King respected them in return. He finally understood why they all treated the sport as seriously as they did. He understood why they worked hard all day long to prepare their bodies for the physical intensity they had to produce to get a win. They apologized to him, but Byru waved off their concern by pouring them more and more beer. They drank as much as they could. The king didn't think he would be able to increase his love for beer, but the feeling of having his newfound friends and teammates drink and celebrate with him was an entirely new sort of happiness that he wouldn't have found if he hadn't left the confines of his kingdom. Finally, he understood why dwarves prefer to live in this village rather than their kingdom. And in truth, if he didn't have the responsibility to protect the kingdom given to him by his ancestors, then he could see himself living in this village and exploring all the culture that it had to offer. As he looked upon the happy faces of his fellow dwarves, the king finalized a decision in his mind. If he couldn't move here for himself, then he would make sure that all the other dwarves in his kingdom would be able to experience what he felt during this night. He wanted them to be free from the old tradition of closing themselves from the world and explore what life had to offer. So he decided he was going to open his doors for this village. He walked out of the tavern and visited the large estate in the middle of the village. This was where their supposed leader lived. The king felt a little bit nervous as he stood at the gates. This would be the first time he would be meeting someone so legendary. He hadn't heard a lot about this Michael character, but from what he gathered, he seemed to be a man of mythical status. His magic was comparable to that of wizards renowned throughout the world. His intellect was of a genius level, with no comparison for him to even be at the same level. "Byru, was it? Michael is ready to see you. Just go through the gates and enter his house," Lolo said, opening the gates for him to enter. "That easy. The Dwarven King didn't think he would be let in so easily without even having to schedule a meeting. He would have thought that Michael's security detail would be a lot stricter than that. He was their leader, after all. Having 100 soldiers pat him down before he entered was the bare minimum. This only told Byru one thing. Michael alone was enough. Byru walked through Michael's door with his mind racing with thoughts about what he perceived Michael to look like. A burly man at the peak of his physical prowess? A hermit in the twilight of his life with a mind full of wisdom? But as the door opened, there was only one person that greeted him on the other side. "Oh, you must be Byru. Welcome to our village," Michael said with the most casual of greetings. The Dwarven King was speechless. He thought he was ready for anything, but he would have never expected that the mastermind of this whole village and the owner of the Reborn company was none other than a 10-year-old human child. You're Michael?" Byru asked. Michael shrugged. "I guess." Byru had to shake his head, thinking that he was still drunk from beer. But no matter how much more sober he got, Michael would still remain as a child. "Forgive my rudeness," Byru said. "I wasn't expecting you to be so young. Experience new stories on Empire." Michael didn't take it to heart. "Don't worry about it. What brings you to my house? Does the Dwarven King need something?" Byru's eyes widened. Michael could see through his disguise, knowing that there was no use in hiding it anymore. He let go of the magic surrounding his body. Slowly, his stature became taller, his eyebrows became a lot wilder, and his beard began to twist and tangle into the signature royal dwarven pattern. Michael was now looking at a dwarf who was even taller than him. Not only that, the dwarf also oozed a sense of regality and dominance, with a confidence that only monarchs had. "You know about my true appearance?" Byru asked. "Yes, sorry. My eyes could see through all types of magic, disguises included. And if I'm going to be honest, I have a friend named Fudge who informed me of your arrival as soon as you made contact with Thrain," Michael said with a casual tone. The Dwarven King could only chuckle once he heard that. If there was any doubt in his mind that Michael was truly capable of doing all the things he had done, then it was now long gone. Just from this little interaction alone, the Dwarven King knew that Michael was not to be messed with. "I'm sorry for trying to deceive you. I simply wanted to observe your village with an unbiased eye," the king apologized. But Michael didn't care about that. He cared more about the Dwarf King's opinion of the village. "And? What do you think? Did you like the game?" Michael asked with a proud smile on his face. The king smiled. "Yes. In the brief time that I have visited your village, I have become enamored with everything it has to offer. So much so that I am willing to break thousands of years of tradition." He faced Michael with a serious expression and held out his hand. "I want to establish a friendly relationship with you, your village, and your company. Let us help each other and grow our territory to much greater heights."